Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Officer Marcus Rivera had been working the 3rd Ward beat for 8 years, but he'd never seen anything like the scene that greeted him on that sweltering Houston morning in July. The temperature was already pushing 95 degrees at 7 a.m., and the humid air hung thick as molasses over the sprawling urban landscape of apartment complexes, strip malls, and corner stores that made up this part of southeast Houston. The call had come in as a shots fired multiple victims at the Magnolia Gardens apartment complex on Scott Street. Rivera knew the complex well. It was one of those places where patrol officers got called at least twice a week for domestic disputes, drug deals gone wrong, or gang activity. But this morning felt different. The usual sounds of the city waking up, traffic, air conditioning units humming, children playing, had been replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. As Rivera pulled his patrol car into the complex parking lot, he immediately noticed the crowd that had gathered near Building C. About 30 residents stood in clusters, some still in their pajamas and robes, all talking in hushed, urgent tones. The Houston Police Department had taught him to read crowds, and this one screamed, "Something really bad happened here." His partner, Officer Sarah Chen, was already on scene. Chen had been with HPD for 12 years and had worked every corner of this massive city, from the affluent River Oaks neighborhood to the industrial Ship Channel area. She was tough as nails and had seen enough to know when a situation was about to spiral out of control. When Rivera saw the look on her face as she approached his vehicle, he knew this wasn't going to be just another routine call. "What we got, Chen?" Rivera asked as he stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his duty belt and feeling the familiar weight of his Glock 22 against his hip. "Triple homicide," Chen said, her voice tight. 3 males, all early 20s, all shot execution style in apartment 3C. Anonymous caller reported hearing gunshots around 4 a.m., but nobody wanted to call it in until sunrise. Rivera nodded. This was typical for the 3rd Ward. Residents had learned through hard experience that calling the police too quickly could make you a target. Better to wait until morning when there were witnesses around and the shooters were long gone. "Gang-related?" Rivera asked, though he already suspected the answer. "That's what it's looking like," Chen replied. "All 3 victims are known associates of the Scrooston soldiers. Word on the street is that the Mara Salvatrucha has been moving into their territory, trying to take over their drug corners along Martin Luther King and Wheeler. The Scrooston soldiers were one of Houston's most violent street gangs, primarily operating in the 3rd Ward and parts of the 5th Ward. They got their name from the Houston hip-hop scene's connection to screw music, the slowed-down, psychedelic rap style that DJ Screw had pioneered in the 1990s. But there was nothing musical about their business model, which revolved around cocaine and crack distribution, armed robbery, and territorial enforcement through extreme violence. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, was a different beast entirely. Originally formed by Salvadoran immigrants in Los Angeles in the 1980s, the gang had spread across the United States like a cancer. Their reputation for brutality was legendary. They were known for using machetes, torturing their victims and leaving bodies in pieces as warnings to rivals. If MS-13 was making a move into Scrooston soldiers' territory, Houston was about to see a level of violence that would make the evening news for weeks. "Any witnesses?" Rivera asked as they walked toward the apartment building. The red brick structure was typical of 1970s low-income housing. 3 stories, exterior stairwells, and parking spaces that were too small for modern cars. Graffiti covered most of the first-floor walls, with competing gang tags creating a patchwork of territorial claims that changed monthly depending on who controlled the block. Mrs. Rodriguez in 3A heard the shots but didn't see anything, Chen said. She's willing to talk, but she's scared out of her mind. Says she heard 4 or 5 different voices arguing in Spanish and English before the shooting started. As they climbed the exterior stairwell to the 3rd floor, Rivera noticed something that made his stomach clench. Fresh graffiti on the wall next to apartment 3C, the distinctive 3 tag that marked MS-13 territory. But it had been spray-painted over the Scrooston Soldiers double S tag, which meant this wasn't just a random killing. This was a declaration of war. The apartment door was slightly ajar, with HPD crime scene tape already blocking the entrance. Through the gap, Rivera could see the legs of one victim extending into the hallway. The smell hit him before he could see the full scene. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the funk of a Houston summer morning with no air conditioning. "Crime scene unit on the way?" Rivera asked. "Should be here in 20 minutes, Chen replied. "But we need to secure the scene and start canvassing for witnesses before people start disappearing." This was the reality of police work in areas like the 3rd Ward. Witnesses had a tendency to develop sudden amnesia or leave town when gang violence erupted. The informal rule in neighborhoods like this was simple. You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. And you definitely didn't talk to police. Breaking that rule could get you killed, and everyone knew it. Rivera was about to suggest they start with Mrs. Rodriguez when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 4-7, this is dispatch. We have reports of shots fired at the intersection of Wheeler and Blodgett. Multiple callers reporting automatic weapon fire. All available units respond." Rivera and Chen looked at each other. Wheeler and Blodgett was less than half a mile away, right in the heart of Scrooston Soldiers territory. If this was retaliation for the apartment murders, things were about to get very ugly very fast. "This is Unit 47, Rivera responded into his radio. "En route to Wheeler and Blodgett. ETA 3 minutes. As they ran back to their patrol cars, Rivera caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. On the opposite side of the parking lot, partially hidden behind a dumpster, a young Hispanic male was filming them with his cell phone. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, but Rivera recognized the look in his eyes. The cold, calculating stare of someone who had already seen too much violence for his age. More importantly, the kid was wearing a white t-shirt with a subtle blue bandana hanging from his back pocket, colors associated with MS-13. He wasn't just filming the crime scene, he was documenting the police response, which meant someone higher up in the gang hierarchy wanted to know exactly how HPD was handling the investigation. As Rivera started his patrol car and hit the sirens, he realized this wasn't just about 3 dead gang members in an apartment. This was the opening move in a territorial war that was going to turn the 3rd Ward into a killing field. And he and Chen were about to be right in the middle of it. The scene at Wheeler and Blodgett looked like something out of a war zone. Rivera counted at least 40 bullet holes in the front wall of the corner stop convenience store, with spiderweb cracks radiating out from each impact point. The store's front windows had been completely shot out, and broken glass glittered on the hot asphalt like deadly confetti. 3 cars in the parking lot had been riddled with bullets: a blue Honda Civic with its rear window blown out, a red Chevy Impala with the driver's side door punctured by at least a dozen rounds, and a white Ford F-150 pickup truck that looked like it had been used for target practice. Steam rose from the pickup's perforated radiator, and Rivera could smell coolant and gasoline mixing in the summer heat. "Jesus Christ," Chen muttered as she surveyed the damage. "How many rounds you think they fired?" "Had to be at least 100, Rivera replied. "Maybe more." This wasn't a drive-by. This was a military-style assault. HPD Sergeant Mike Kowalski was already on scene, coordinating with other units and trying to establish a perimeter. Kowalski was a 20-year veteran who had worked every kind of case imaginable in Houston, from domestic violence calls in the Heights to drug raids in the Fifth Ward. He was the kind of cop who had seen it all and rarely got rattled, but Rivera could see the tension in his shoulders as he approached. "What's the situation, Sarge?" Rivera asked. 4 gunmen in 2 vehicles opened fire on the store around 7:30, Kowalski said. Witnesses say they were using AK-47s and possibly an AR-15. Fired for about 30 seconds, then took off heading east on Wheeler. "Any casualties?" Chen asked. "Miracle there weren't any deaths," Kowalski replied. Store clerk dove behind the counter when the shooting started. Customer in the back was grazed by glass, but nothing serious. But here's the thing. The gunmen weren't trying to rob the place. They specifically targeted the area where the Scrooston soldiers hang out. Rivera looked around and noticed what the sergeant was talking about. The corner where Wheeler met Blodgett was a known drug corner, one of the most profitable in the Third Ward. The Scrooston soldiers had controlled it for almost 5 years, using the convenience store as an unofficial headquarters. Young dealers would post up outside, using hand signals and code words to serve a steady stream of customers coming from all over southeast Houston. But today, the corner was empty except for shell casings and broken glass. "Any of the SS crew around when it happened?" Rivera asked. "That's the interesting part," Kowalski said. "Store clerk says there were about 6 of them hanging out here at 7:15, just like every morning, but they all disappeared about 10 minutes before the shooting started, almost like they got a warning." Chen frowned. "You thinking there's a leak in the organization? Or someone saw something at the apartment complex and passed word along?" Rivera suggested. 3 dead soldiers this morning, automatic weapons fire an hour later. This is definitely connected. As they were talking, Rivera's radio crackled again. This time, it was dispatch with an urgent tone he'd learned to recognize over his 8 years with HPD. All units. We have reports of a vehicle on fire at the intersection of Scott and Holmes. Fire department responding. Possible connection to ongoing gang violence in the Third Ward." Scott and Holmes was less than 2 miles away, right in the heart of what locals called the Bottom, a particularly rough section of the Third Ward where the abandoned industrial buildings provided perfect cover for illegal activities. If someone was burning vehicles there, it usually meant they were destroying evidence. "Unit 47 responding," Rivera said into his radio. As they drove toward the new location, Chen pulled up the gang intelligence files on her mobile data terminal. The HPD gang division maintained detailed profiles on all known gang members in the city, including their criminal histories, known associates, and territorial boundaries. "Take a look at this," Chen said, showing Rivera the screen. MS-13 has been trying to expand their territory for the past 6 months. Intelligence says they've been recruiting heavily in the Gulfton area and along the Southwest Freeway. Rivera glanced at the data while navigating through traffic. MS-13's expansion pattern showed a clear strategy. They were targeting drug corners with high profit margins and relatively weak defenses. The Third Ward represented a massive opportunity because the Scrooston soldiers, despite their reputation for violence, were actually a relatively small organization compared to gangs in other major cities. "How many active SS members are we talking about?" Rivera asked. Maybe 40 to 50 hardcore members, Chen replied. But they control some of the most valuable real estate in terms of drug sales. We're talking about corners that generate tens of thousands of dollars a day. As they turned onto Scott Street, Rivera could see the black smoke rising from several blocks away. When they arrived at the intersection of Scott and Holmes, they found the twisted, charred remains of what had once been a dark blue Chevy Tahoe. The vehicle was completely engulfed in flames, with Houston Fire Department crews working to extinguish the blaze. But it was what Rivera saw in the vacant lot next to the burning vehicle that made his stomach drop. Spray-painted in large red letters across the side of an abandoned warehouse was a message that chilled him to the bone. SS Dead. MS-13. Territory now. Run or die. The message was fresh. The paint was still wet in some places, which meant the people who wrote it were probably still in the area, watching to see how the police would respond. Rivera started scanning the surrounding buildings, looking for any sign of movement. The abandoned warehouse had dozens of broken windows that could conceal shooters. The vacant lots were overgrown with weeds and filled with debris that could hide weapons caches or drug stashes. Even the seemingly empty houses could be occupied by gang members or their associates. "This is getting out of hand fast," Chen said, echoing Rivera's thoughts. Fire Captain Rodriguez approached them as his crew continued working on the vehicle fire. "Vehicles stolen," he said. "Plates came back as taken from a parking lot in Montrose last night. But here's the weird part. There's an accelerant pattern that suggests this wasn't just vandalism. Someone wanted to make sure this thing burned completely." "Any idea what they were trying to destroy?" Rivera asked. "Could be weapons, drugs, documents," Rodriguez replied. "Or maybe just sending a message. Sometimes the act of burning something is more important than what's actually being destroyed." As if to emphasize the captain's point, Rivera's radio came to life again. This time, it was Officer Janet Williams from the East Side Patrol Division. "Unit 6-2 to dispatch. We have a body dumped at the intersection of Emancipation and Dowling. Hispanic male, approximately 20 years old, multiple gunshot wounds, appears to be gang-related." Rivera felt his jaw clench. Emancipation and Dowling was on the eastern edge of the 3rd Ward territory, right at the boundary where Scrooston Soldiers' turf met the area, controlled by a smaller gang called the Dirty South Soldiers. If bodies were being dumped at territorial boundaries, it meant the violence was spreading beyond just MS-13 and the Scrooston Soldiers. "Chen, we need to get over there," Rivera said. "Hold up," Chen replied, pointing toward the abandoned warehouse. "Look at the roof line." Rivera followed her gaze and saw what she was pointing at. 3 figures were silhouetted against the morning sky, standing on the edge of the warehouse roof. They were too far away to make out details, but their posture suggested they were watching the police response below. "You thinking spotters?" Rivera asked. "Has to be," Chen said. "They want to see how many units we send, how long we stay, what kind of resources we're putting into this." This was a common gang tactic, using lookouts to gather intelligence on police operations. The information would be passed up the chain of command and used to plan future attacks or avoid law enforcement. But the boldness of positioning spotters in broad daylight, less than 100 yards from an active crime scene, suggested a level of organization and confidence that worried Rivera. As they watched, one of the figures on the roof raised what appeared to be a cell phone, clearly filming or photographing the scene below. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, all 3 figures disappeared from view. "We need backup," Rivera said, reaching for his radio. "If they're this organized, this brazen, we're dealing with something bigger than a simple territorial dispute." But before he could make the call, his radio erupted with chatter from multiple units across the city. "Unit 3-4. shots fired at the Fiesta Mart on navigation. Unit 57, armed robbery in progress at the pawn shop on Harrisburg. Unit 2-1, vehicle pursuit eastbound on I-45, suspect vehicle described as a black sedan with multiple occupants. Rivera and Chen looked at each other with growing alarm. This wasn't random crime, this was coordinated chaos. Someone was orchestrating multiple incidents across the Third Ward and surrounding areas, stretching HPD resources thin and creating maximum confusion. "They're trying to overwhelm our response," Chen said. "Or create diversions while they move weapons, drugs, or people," Rivera added. As they stood in the growing heat beside the burning vehicle, watching the black smoke rise into the Houston sky, Rivera realized they were witnessing something that would fundamentally change policing in the Third Ward. This wasn't just about gang territory anymore. This was about control of one of the most lucrative drug markets in Texas, and MS-13 was bringing a level of sophistication and ruthlessness that the local gangs weren't prepared for. And caught in the middle were patrol officers like him and Chen, trying to maintain order in a neighborhood that was rapidly descending into a war zone. By noon, the temperature had climbed to 102 degrees, and the asphalt on Scott Street was soft enough to take footprints. Rivera and Chen had been working non-stop for 5 hours, responding to call after call in what was clearly a coordinated campaign of violence and intimidation. The body count was rising. In addition to the 3 execution-style murders at the Magnolia Gardens apartment complex, they now had 2 more shooting victims. A Screwston Soldiers Associate found dead behind a Valero gas station on Colon Boulevard, and a young woman with gang connections discovered in the parking lot of a strip club on the South Loop. But it was the pattern of the violence that bothered Rivera most. Each incident was precisely targeted, surgically executed, and designed to send a specific message. This wasn't random gang violence. This was military-style psychological warfare. "Control, this is Unit 47, Rivera said into his radio, requesting permission to make contact with gang division. "Unit 47, stand by," came the response from dispatch. While they waited for authorization, Chen was studying the locations of all the morning's incidents on her mobile data terminal. She had plotted each crime scene on a digital map of the Third Ward, and the pattern that emerged was revealing. "Look at this," she said, showing Rivera the screen. Every single incident this morning happened within a 6-block radius. They're not trying to take over the whole Third Ward. They're going after specific high-value targets. Rivera studied the map. Chen was right. The incidents formed a rough circle around some of the most profitable drug corners in southeast Houston. The Magnolia Gardens apartment complex sat at the center of a network of street-level dealers who supplied crack and powder cocaine to customers coming from the suburbs. The Wheeler and Blodgett intersection was a major distribution point that generated an estimated $50,000 a week in revenue. "They're going after the money," Rivera said. "Take out the key players, terrorize the foot soldiers, and the whole distribution network collapses." Unit 47, you're cleared to coordinate with Gang Division. Dispatch crackled over the radio. Detective Martinez will meet you at the Scott Street location. Detective Luis Martinez had been with the HPD Gang Division for 6 years and was considered one of the department's foremost experts on Houston's criminal organizations. Martinez had grown up in the Second Ward and spoke fluent Spanish, which gave him access to information that other officers couldn't obtain. More importantly, he had cultivated a network of informants who kept him updated on the constantly shifting alliances and conflicts between the city's gangs. When Martinez arrived at the scene 15 minutes later, Rivera could see the concern in his eyes. Martinez was usually cool and collected, but today he looked like a man who had seen something that genuinely worried him. "This is bigger than what you're seeing on the street," Martinez said without preamble. "We've been tracking MS-13 expansion for months, but this level of coordination suggests they've got backing from someone with serious resources." "What kind of resources?" Chen asked. "Money, weapons, intelligence," Martinez replied. "The kind of support that usually comes from cartel connections." The mention of cartel involvement sent a chill down Rivera's spine. Houston's proximity to Mexico made it a natural transit point for drugs moving from South America to markets across the United States. But cartel operations in Texas tended to focus on trafficking and distribution at the wholesale level, not street-level gang warfare. "You thinking the Zetas? Gulf Cartel?" Rivera asked. "Could be either," Martinez said. "Or it could be MS-13 has made a deal with multiple organizations. What I'm hearing from my sources is that someone promised MS-13 unlimited ammunition and protection from law enforcement if they could take control of the Third Ward drug trade." The implications of this were staggering. If MS-13 had cartel backing, they would have access to military-grade weapons, sophisticated communication equipment, and potentially corrupt officials who could tip them off to police operations. The Screwston soldiers, despite their reputation for violence, were essentially a street gang with limited resources and organization. They would be completely outmatched. "How reliable are your sources?" Chen asked. "Reliable enough that I've already briefed the chief," Martinez replied, "and reliable enough that we're requesting federal assistance." "FBI?" Rivera asked. "DEA, ATF, maybe even ICE," Martinez said. "If we're dealing with international cartel connections, this is way beyond what HPD can handle alone." As they were talking, Rivera noticed a commotion developing across the street. A group of about 20 residents had gathered in the parking lot of a liquor store, and their body language suggested growing agitation. Some were pointing toward the burned-out vehicle, others were gesturing angrily at the police cars. "We might have a crowd control situation developing," Rivera said, nodding toward the gathering. Martinez followed his gaze and frowned. "That's not just random residents. See the way they're positioned? The way some of them are watching the street corners instead of the crime scene? Those are spotters and enforcers." Rivera looked more carefully and realized Martinez was right. While most of the crowd appeared to be neighborhood residents expressing legitimate concern about the violence, several individuals were clearly there for other reasons. They were younger, better dressed, and positioned to watch approaching vehicles rather than the crime scene itself. "Gang security," Chen said, recognizing the same pattern. "But which gang?" Rivera asked. "SS trying to protect their remaining territory, or MS-13 making sure we don't find evidence they missed?" Before anyone could answer, Rivera's radio erupted with an urgent call that made his blood run cold. All units. Officer down at the intersection of Blodgett and Ennis. Multiple shooters. Automatic weapons. All available units respond immediately." Blodgett and Ennis was less than a mile away, right in the heart of the area they'd been working all morning. Rivera, Chen, and Martinez ran to their vehicles. But as they were getting ready to respond, Martinez grabbed Rivera's arm. "Wait," he said. "This could be a trap." "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Martinez said. "They've been coordinating attacks all morning, creating maximum chaos. Now, suddenly there's an officer down call right in the middle of their operational area? It's too convenient." Rivera felt his training warring with his instincts. Every fiber of his being wanted to race toward the officer down call. It was the most fundamental rule of police work that you always responded to help a fellow officer. But Martinez's tactical experience was telling him something different. "We go, but we go smart," Rivera decided. "Full tactical approach. Assume it's an ambush." As they raced toward Blodgett and Ennis with sirens wailing, Rivera caught sight of something in his rearview mirror that confirmed Martinez's suspicions. The crowd that had gathered across from the crime scene was dispersing rapidly, with several individuals running toward vehicles parked on side streets. More importantly, Rivera could see at least 3 different people talking on cell phones as they moved, clearly coordinating with someone else. If the officer down call was legitimate, why would gang members be fleeing the area? Unless they already knew what was happening at Blodgett and Ennis. When they arrived at the intersection, they found 2 HPD patrol cars positioned at angles to create cover, with 4 officers crouched behind their vehicles with weapons drawn. But there was no sign of any down officer, no evidence of gunfire, and no suspects in sight. Officer David Kim, a 10-year veteran who worked the East Side beat, approached their vehicle as they arrived. "False alarm," Kim said. "Got a call about shots fired and an officer down, but there's nobody here. No shell casings, no blood, no signs of any incident." "Who made the call?" Chen asked. "Anonymous caller from a payphone on Wheeler Street," Kim replied. Dispatcher said it sounded like a young Hispanic male, but the connection was poor. Rivera and Martinez exchanged glances. A fake officer down call was one of the most serious crimes someone could commit against law enforcement, but it was also a classic diversion tactic. While HPD units were racing to respond to a non-existent emergency, the real action was happening somewhere else. "Control, this is Unit 47, Rivera said into his radio. "Request status on all 3rd Ward units. Unit 4-7, stand by for status check." As they waited for the response, Rivera noticed something that made his stomach clench. Fresh graffiti on a stop sign at the intersection. The distinctive 3 tag that marked MS-13 territory, but this time with something new. Below the gang identifier, someone had spray-painted "Cops Next" in red letters. It wasn't just a territorial claim anymore, it was a direct threat against law enforcement. "Unit 47, we have a problem," dispatch came back over the radio. "Unit 6-3 is not responding to radio calls. Last known location was a traffic stop at Sampson and Blodgett approximately 20 minutes ago." Rivera felt ice water flowing through his veins despite the brutal Houston heat. Officer Marcus Thompson worked Unit 6-3, and he was known for being meticulous about radio protocols. If Thompson wasn't responding to radio calls, something was seriously wrong. "All units, immediate search for Unit 6-3, Rivera said into his radio. "Last seen Sampson and Blodgett. Consider this a Priority 1 emergency." As they raced toward the last known location of the missing patrol unit, Rivera realized that the gang war he'd been witnessing all morning had just escalated to a level that would change everything. If MS-13 was targeting police officers directly, the entire dynamic of law enforcement in the 3rd Ward was about to shift. And somewhere in the maze of streets, abandoned buildings, and hostile territory that made up southeast Houston, Officer Marcus Thompson was either fighting for his life or already dead. Sampson and Blodgett was a desolate intersection surrounded by vacant lots, abandoned houses, and a few businesses that looked like they hadn't seen customers in years. Rivera had patrolled these streets for 8 years, but today the familiar neighborhood felt alien and threatening. Unit 6-3 was nowhere to be seen. "Spread out and search," Martinez ordered over the radio. "Look for any sign of Thompson's patrol car, any evidence of a struggle, anything unusual." Rivera began methodically checking every driveway, alley, and parking lot within a 4-block radius of the intersection. The summer heat was becoming oppressive, with the concrete and asphalt radiating waves of heat that made the air shimmer like water. Sweat was pouring down his back beneath his Kevlar vest, but adrenaline kept him focused. Chen was checking the abandoned houses on the north side of Blodgett when her radio crackled. "I've got something," she said. "Fresh tire tracks in the dirt behind the old gas station on Sampson. Looks like a vehicle was here recently and left in a hurry." Rivera and Martinez converged on Chen's location. The abandoned Texaco station had been closed for at least 5 years, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. But behind the building, in what used to be the service bay area, there were clear signs that vehicles had been there recently. Multiple tire tracks, Martinez observed, crouching down to examine the marks in the dirt. At least 3 different vehicles, maybe 4. And look at this. He pointed to a dark stain in the dirt that looked suspiciously like motor oil. But when Rivera knelt down for a closer look, he realized it wasn't oil at all. It was blood. "Fresh blood," Chen said, confirming Rivera's suspicion. "Maybe an hour old at most." Rivera's radio erupted with a call that made his heart race. "Unit 4-7. This is Unit 8-2. We found Thompson's patrol car. Abandoned parking lot behind the church's chicken on Wheeler Street. Vehicle appears to be intact, but Thompson is not on scene. Wheeler Street was 6 blocks away from Sampson and Blodgett, too far for Thompson to have walked, especially if he was injured, which meant either he had been taken somewhere against his will, or he had abandoned his patrol car and was hiding. En route to Wheeler Street location, Rivera responded. When they arrived at the church's chicken parking lot, they found Unit 6-3 sitting empty with the driver's door open and the engine still running. Thompson's radio was still clipped to the dashboard, his shotgun was secured in its rack, and his duty bag was on the passenger seat. But Thompson himself was gone. Officer Janet Williams, who had discovered the abandoned patrol car, approached Rivera with a grim expression. "No signs of a struggle inside the vehicle," Williams reported. "But take a look at this." She led them to the rear of the patrol car, where someone had used what appeared to be a knife or screwdriver to carve a message into the paint of the trunk lid. 24 hours, corner of Scott and Belfort. Come alone, or he dies. Below the message was the distinctive 13 tag that marked MS-13 territory. Rivera felt his hands clenching into fists. This wasn't just gang violence anymore. This was a direct attack on the Houston Police Department. And whoever had taken Thompson was confident enough in their position to issue demands to law enforcement. "Scott and Belfort," Chen said. "That's right in the middle of their new territory." "It's a trap," Martinez added. "Has to be. They take a cop, leave his car where we'll find it, then try to lure more officers into an ambush." Rivera studied the message carved into the patrol car. The handwriting was crude but deliberate, and the English was grammatically correct. Whoever had written it was educated and comfortable with both languages. Not a typical street-level gang member. 24 hours, Rivera said. That gives us time to plan a response, but it also means Thompson has to survive that long. His radio came to life with a call from HPD headquarters. Unit 4-7, this is Captain Rodriguez. You and your partner report to headquarters immediately for briefing. Gang division and federal agents are en route. Copy that, Captain, en route to headquarters. As they drove back toward downtown Houston, Rivera's mind was racing. The abduction of a police officer was the kind of escalation that would bring massive resources to bear on the Third Ward. FBI, DEA, ATF, possibly even military special operations units would be mobilized. The entire dynamic of the gang war was about to change. But 24 hours was also enough time for MS-13 to fortify their positions, move weapons and personnel, and prepare for the law enforcement response they knew was coming. Whoever was orchestrating their operations understood both gang tactics and police procedures well enough to stay one step ahead. HPD headquarters was buzzing with activity when Rivera and Chen arrived. The gang division bullpen had been converted into a command center, with maps of the Third Ward covering every available wall space and federal agents setting up communication equipment. Captain Maria Rodriguez was a 25-year veteran who had worked her way up through the ranks by being smart, tough, and politically savvy. She had commanded the Third Ward Patrol Division for 3 years before being promoted to headquarters, and she understood the neighborhood's dynamics better than most. "Sit down," Captain Rodriguez said as Rivera and Chen entered her office. "We need to talk." 2 federal agents were already in the room. A tall, thin man in his 40s wearing a dark suit despite the Houston heat, and a younger woman with short blonde hair and the kind of alert posture that suggested military training. "Special Agent David Foster, DEA," the man said, shaking hands with Rivera and Chen. "And this is Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, FBI. We've been tracking MS-13 expansion in the Houston area for several months," Agent Foster said. "What happened today confirms our worst fears about their level of organization and external support." Agent Mitchell opened a laptop computer and turned the screen toward Rivera and Chen. "We believe MS-13 has formed an alliance with elements of the Zetas cartel to take control of Houston's street-level drug distribution. The Zetas provide weapons, money, and intelligence, while MS-13 provides street-level enforcement and territorial control." The implications were staggering. The Zetas were one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels, known for their military training and sophisticated operations. If they were backing MS-13's expansion into Houston, local law enforcement was facing an enemy with resources and capabilities far beyond anything they had dealt with before. "What about Thompson?" Rivera asked. "Thompson is the key to everything," Captain Rodriguez said. "They didn't take him for ransom or to trade for imprisoned gang members. They took him to demonstrate that they can strike at law enforcement with impunity." "But why Thompson specifically?" Chen asked. "He's a good officer, but he's not gang division, not undercover, not involved in any high-profile investigations." Agent Mitchell pulled up another file on her laptop. "Officer Thompson conducted a traffic stop yesterday evening that may have compromised a significant MS-13 operation. The driver was carrying a suitcase containing $200,000 in cash and detailed maps of drug distribution routes throughout southeast Houston." Rivera felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Thompson stumbled onto something big, bigger than he realized," Agent Foster said. "The money was supposed to fund the final phase of MS-13's takeover of Third Ward territory. Without it, their timeline got accelerated and their methods became more desperate. So, this morning's violence, the apartment murders, the drive-by shooting, the false officer down call, that was all improvisation?" Rivera asked. "Exactly," Captain Rodriguez said. "They're operating off script now, which makes them both more dangerous and more vulnerable. But it also means Thompson's life is hanging by a thread." Agent Mitchell leaned forward in her chair. "We have intelligence suggesting that MS-13's leadership is split on how to handle the Thompson situation. Some want to use him as a bargaining chip. Others want to make an example that will terrorize local law enforcement into backing down." "What's our move?" Rivera asked. "We're going to give them what they want," Captain Rodriguez said. "Tomorrow at Scott and Belfort, someone is going to show up alone, just like they demanded." Rivera felt his stomach drop. "Captain, that's suicide. Scott and Belfort is surrounded by abandoned buildings where they could position snipers. There's no way to secure that location." "You're right," Agent Foster said. "Which is why the person going to that meeting isn't going to be a real police officer." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Rivera realized they were talking about using an undercover federal agent to impersonate a Houston police officer in what would almost certainly be a trap. Agent Foster continued, "The DEA has an operative who's been working cartel cases in South Texas for 3 years. He speaks fluent Spanish, knows gang protocols, and has experience dealing with situations like this." "What about Thompson?" Chen asked. "How do we know he'll still be alive when this agent shows up?" "We don't," Agent Mitchell said bluntly. "But we have to assume MS-13 wants something more than just killing a police officer. If they wanted Thompson dead, they would have killed him at the traffic stop yesterday." Captain Rodriguez stood up and walked to the map of the 3rd Ward that covered one wall of her office. "Here's what we know about their operational structure," she said, pointing to various locations marked with colored pins. MS-13 has established 3 safe houses in the area, one on Blodgett Street, one near the University of Houston campus, and one in the industrial area near the ship channel. "Any of those locations where they might be holding Thompson?" Rivera asked. "Most likely the industrial location," Agent Foster said. "It's isolated, surrounded by warehouses and chemical plants, and has multiple escape routes. Plus, the background noise from industrial equipment would mask any sounds Thompson might make." Rivera studied the map and realized the industrial area Agent Foster was describing was a maze of refineries, storage tanks, and shipping facilities that stretched for miles along the Houston Ship Channel. If Thompson was being held somewhere in that area, finding him would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. "What's our role in all this?" Chen asked. "You two know the 3rd Ward better than anyone," Captain Rodriguez said. "You'll be part of the surveillance team monitoring the Scott and Belfort meeting. But more importantly, you'll be leading the search for Thompson while MS-13's attention is focused on the meeting." Agent Mitchell pulled up aerial photographs of the industrial area on her laptop. "Satellite imagery from this morning shows increased vehicle activity at 3 specific locations," she said, pointing to different sections of the photographs. "Here, here, and here. One of these is probably where they're holding Officer Thompson." Rivera examined the satellite images and recognized the locations. The first was a chemical storage facility that had been abandoned for several years after an environmental cleanup. The second was an active shipping terminal where containers from all over the world were loaded and unloaded around the clock. The third was a cluster of warehouses that had been converted into artists' studios and small businesses. "The chemical plant," Rivera said. "That's where I'd hold someone if I wanted to make sure nobody could hear them scream." "Agreed," Agent Foster said. "But we can't move on any of these locations until after the meeting tomorrow. If MS-13 realizes we're not taking their demand seriously, Thompson dies." Captain Rodriguez looked at her watch. "It's 2 p.m. now. The meeting is set for 2 p.m. tomorrow, which gives us exactly 24 hours to plan this operation. Agent Foster's undercover operative arrives tonight, and we'll spend the morning briefing him on Houston protocols and 3rd Ward geography." "What about backup?" Rivera asked. "Even if this undercover agent can fool MS-13 initially, they're going to figure out something's wrong pretty quickly. We'll have sniper teams positioned on the surrounding buildings," Agent Mitchell said. "SWAT units staged 2 blocks away, and air support on standby. The moment Thompson is secure, we move in with overwhelming force." Rivera nodded, but he was still troubled by the plan's complexity. Too many things could go wrong, and Thompson's life depended on perfect execution by people who had never worked together before. His radio crackled with an urgent call that made everyone in the room tense up. All units. We have reports of an explosion at the Valero refinery on the ship channel. Fire department and hazmat teams responding. Possible terrorist activity." Rivera and Chen looked at each other with growing alarm. The timing was too convenient. Just as law enforcement was mobilizing to respond to Thompson's kidnapping, MS-13 was creating another major incident that would stretch resources even thinner. "They're not done," Rivera said. This morning was just the opening act. Agent Foster was already on his cell phone, talking rapidly in Spanish to someone on the other end. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "My sources say the explosion was caused by a car bomb," he said. "Same type of device the Zetas use in Mexico. We're not just dealing with street gang violence anymore, we're dealing with international terrorism." Captain Rodriguez began issuing rapid-fire orders. "Rivera, Chen, get back to the 3rd Ward and coordinate with fire department personnel at the refinery. I want to know if this explosion is connected to Thompson's kidnapping or if it's part of a larger operation." As Rivera and Chen headed for the door, Agent Mitchell called after them. "Be careful out there," she said. "If they're willing to bomb a refinery, they won't hesitate to target police officers." Driving back toward the ship channel, Rivera could see the black smoke from the explosion rising high into the afternoon sky. The Valero refinery was one of the largest in Texas, processing hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude oil every day. An explosion there could kill dozens of workers and create an environmental disaster that would impact the entire Houston area. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Chen asked as they navigated through traffic that was getting heavier, as people tried to flee the area around the refinery. "That this is all connected," Rivera replied. "Thompson's kidnapping, the morning violence, now the refinery explosion. Someone's orchestrating a campaign to bring Houston to its knees." "But why?" Chen asked. "What do they gain from all this chaos?" Rivera thought about it as they approached the refinery complex. The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. "They're not trying to take over the 3rd Ward drug trade," he said. "They're trying to take over the entire Houston drug market. Create enough chaos and violence to drive out competing gangs, corrupt enough officials to ensure protection, and establish Houston as the primary distribution hub for the entire Southwest United States." The implications were staggering. Houston was already one of the most important ports in North America, with cargo ships arriving daily from Central and South America. If MS-13 could establish complete control over the city's criminal infrastructure, they could funnel drugs, weapons, and human trafficking operations through Houston to markets across the United States. As they arrived at the refinery, Rivera realized that Officer Thompson's kidnapping wasn't just about one police officer. It was about sending a message to every law enforcement agency in Texas. MS-13 was no longer just a street gang. They were an army, and they were declaring war on anyone who stood in their way. The question was whether Houston police, even with federal assistance, had the resources and expertise to fight back against an enemy this sophisticated and ruthless. Looking at the massive cloud of toxic smoke rising from the refinery explosion, Rivera wasn't sure they did. The Valero refinery complex sprawled across nearly 1,000 acres along the Houston Ship Channel. A maze of distillation towers, storage tanks, and processing units that never slept. Rivera had driven past it countless times during his 8 years with HPD, but he had never been inside the facility during an emergency. The scene that greeted them was like something from a disaster movie. 3 separate fires were burning in different sections of the refinery, sending columns of black smoke into the afternoon sky. Houston Fire Department crews were working frantically to contain the blazes while refinery workers evacuated in a steady stream of vehicles heading away from the complex. Fire Chief Angela Martinez was coordinating the response from a command post set up in the refinery's main parking lot. Rivera knew Chief Martinez by reputation. She was a 30-year veteran who had responded to every major industrial accident in Houston since the early 1990s. If anyone could handle a situation like this, it was her. Chief Martinez, Rivera said as he and Chen approached the command post. HPD Gang Division asked us to coordinate with you on this incident. We have reason to believe this explosion may be connected to ongoing gang violence in the Third Ward. Chief Martinez looked up from the radio equipment she was monitoring. Gang violence? She said. Officer, this wasn't gang violence. This was a sophisticated bombing using military-grade explosives. Rivera felt his blood run cold. Military-grade? C4 or something similar, Chief Martinez said. Detonated simultaneously at 3 different locations within the refinery complex. The precision required to pull this off suggests someone with extensive knowledge of refinery operations and explosives handling. Chen was studying the tactical maps spread across the command post table. Chief, were any refinery workers injured in the explosions? That's the strange part, Chief Martinez replied. All 3 explosions occurred in sections of the refinery that were scheduled for maintenance today. Those areas had been evacuated of personnel since 6 a.m. this morning. Rivera and Chen exchanged glances. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had inside information about refinery operations and had planned the bombing to minimize casualties while maximizing psychological impact. Any security camera footage of the explosions? Rivera asked. Refinery security is pulling all footage from the past 24 hours, Chief Martinez said. But initial reports suggest the explosive devices were planted sometime overnight, when security coverage is minimal. Rivera's radio crackled with a call from dispatch that made his stomach clench. Unit 4-7, this is Control. We need you to respond to a disturbance at Herman Park. Multiple callers reporting gunshots near the zoo entrance. Herman Park was on the other side of Houston from the refinery, at least a 40-minute drive in normal traffic. Rivera realized this was another diversion tactic, designed to pull police resources away from the refinery and the Third Ward. Control, this is Unit 47. We're currently assisting fire department operations at the refinery explosion. Can you assign another unit to Herman Park? Negative, Unit 4-7. All available units are responding to incidents across the city. You're the closest unit to Herman Park. Rivera felt frustration building. MS-13 was orchestrating multiple incidents simultaneously, stretching HPD resources so thin that individual officers couldn't focus on any single investigation. It was a classic insurgency tactic. Create chaos across a wide area to prevent effective law enforcement response. Chief Martinez, Rivera said, we need to respond to another incident, but I want to leave you with some information. We believe the group responsible for this bombing has also kidnapped one of our officers. If you find any evidence linking this explosion to MS-13 or cartel activity, please contact Gang Division immediately. Will do, Chief Martinez said. And Officer Rivera, be careful out there. If these people are willing to bomb a refinery, they won't hesitate to target police. As Rivera and Chen drove toward Herman Park, Rivera's mind was racing. The sophistication of the refinery bombing suggested MS-13 had access to resources far beyond what a typical street gang could acquire. Military-grade explosives, inside information about refinery operations, and the ability to coordinate simultaneous attacks across Houston all pointed to cartel backing. But which cartel? The Zetas were known for their military training and sophisticated operations, but they typically focused on border regions and major trafficking routes. The Gulf Cartel had historically controlled drug smuggling through the Houston port, but they usually avoided high-profile attacks that would attract federal attention. You thinking what I'm thinking? Chen asked as they navigated through traffic that was getting heavier as the afternoon rush hour approached. That we're in over our heads? Rivera replied. That we're dealing with something bigger than gang warfare, Chen said. This feels like terrorism. Rivera had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Chen say it out loud made it more real. If MS-13 was using terrorist tactics, bombing critical infrastructure, kidnapping law enforcement officers, creating mass casualty incidents, then the entire approach to dealing with them would need to change. When they arrived at Herman Park, they found a scene that was both familiar and surreal. The park was crowded with families enjoying the afternoon, children playing on playground equipment, and couples walking along the trails. But near the zoo entrance, a large area had been cordoned off with police tape, and several HPD units were already on scene. Officer Mike Rodriguez, a veteran of the Southeast Patrol Division, approached their vehicle as they arrived. "False alarm," Rodriguez said. "Multiple callers reported gunshots, but we can't find any evidence of firearms discharge. No shell casings, no damage to property, no injured parties." "Any witnesses?" Rivera asked. "That's the weird part," Rodriguez said. "Everyone heard the gunshots, but nobody actually saw any shooters, and the sounds seem to have come from different directions simultaneously." Rivera felt a chill despite the brutal Houston heat. This was the same pattern they'd seen all day. Incidents that seemed real enough to trigger a law enforcement response, but turned out to be diversions designed to waste time and resources. "You thinking firecrackers? Cherry bombs?" Chen asked. "Maybe," Rodriguez said. "Or someone using electronic devices to simulate gunfire. The sounds were too uniform, too synchronized to be real gunshots." As they were talking, Rivera's radio erupted with another urgent call. All units. Officer Thompson has been located. Repeat, Officer Thompson has been located alive at the intersection of Scott and Belfort. Medical assistance requested immediately." Rivera felt a surge of relief mixed with confusion. The meeting at Scott and Belfort wasn't supposed to happen until tomorrow afternoon. Why would MS-13 release Thompson early? "Unit 47, responding to Scott and Belfort," Rivera said into his radio. As they raced back across Houston toward the Third Ward, Rivera's mind was working through the possibilities. Either MS-13 had changed their plans for some reason, or this was another trap designed to lure law enforcement officers into an ambush. When they arrived at Scott and Belfort, they found Officer Thompson sitting on the curb with paramedics checking his vital signs. Thompson appeared to be uninjured, but was clearly shaken by his ordeal. Several HPD units had already secured the area, and gang division detectives were beginning their preliminary interviews. "Thompson," Rivera called out as he approached. "You okay, man?" Thompson looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "They let me go," he said. "Just drove me here, pushed me out of the car and took off." "Did you see who was holding you?" Chen asked. 3 guys, maybe 4, Thompson said. All Hispanic, early 20s, spoke Spanish and English. But here's the thing. They treated me well. Gave me food, water, even let me use a bathroom, like they were waiting for orders about what to do with me. Detective Martinez from Gang Division approached with a grim expression. "Thompson, we need to know everything you remember about where they held you. Every detail could be important." "Industrial area," Thompson said. "Lots of noise from machinery, smell of chemicals in the air. They kept me in what looked like an abandoned office building, but it was set up like a command center. Maps on the walls, communication equipment, weapons." Rivera felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Maps of what?" "Houston," Thompson said. "But not just the Third Ward. Maps of the entire city, with locations marked in different colors. Red pins, blue pins, yellow pins, like they were planning operations all over Houston." The implications were staggering. If MS-13 was planning coordinated operations across the entire Houston metropolitan area, they were dealing with something far more ambitious than a simple territorial takeover. "Any idea why they let you go?" Detective Martinez asked. Thompson was quiet for a moment, thinking. "One of them got a phone call around noon," he said. "After that, everything changed. They started packing up equipment, destroying documents, like they got orders to shut down the operation." Rivera's radio crackled with a call that made everything clear. All units. We have reports of multiple explosions at chemical plants along the ship channel. Hazmat teams responding. This appears to be coordinated terrorist activity." As Rivera looked at the expanding cloud of smoke rising from the industrial area along the ship channel, he realized that Officer Thompson's kidnapping had never been about ransom or intimidation. It had been a diversion to keep law enforcement focused on the Third Ward, while MS-13 prepared for something much bigger. The refinery bombing hadn't been the main event. It had been a test run. And now, whatever MS-13 had really been planning was finally beginning. The Houston ship channel stretched for 50 miles from the Gulf of Mexico to the heart of Houston, lined with more than 200 chemical plants, refineries, and industrial facilities. It was one of the most important petrochemical corridors in the world, processing millions of barrels of crude oil and thousands of tons of chemicals every day. It was also, Rivera realized with growing horror, the perfect target for a terrorist attack. As they raced toward the ship channel, Rivera could see multiple columns of smoke rising from different locations along the industrial corridor. His radio was crackling with reports from units across the Houston area. Explosions at a chemical plant in Pasadena, fires at a storage facility in Deer Park, evacuations underway at a refinery in Texas City. "This is coordinated," Chen said, stating what Rivera was already thinking. "They're hitting multiple targets simultaneously to overwhelm emergency response." Rivera's cell phone rang. It was Captain Rodriguez calling from HPD headquarters. "Rivera, where are you?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "En route to the ship channel," Rivera replied. "We just recovered Officer Thompson, and he provided intelligence suggesting MS-13 has been planning operations across the entire Houston area. That confirms what we're seeing from here," Captain Rodriguez said. "We have incidents reported at 7 different industrial facilities, all within a 2-hour time frame. This isn't gang violence. This is domestic terrorism." "Any word from the federal agents?" Rivera asked. "FBI is declaring this a national security incident," Captain Rodriguez said. "They're mobilizing counterterrorism units from Dallas and San Antonio. But it's going to take hours for them to get here, and we need to respond now." Rivera could hear the stress in the captain's voice. HPD was a large department with over 5,000 officers, but they weren't equipped to handle multiple terrorist attacks simultaneously. This was the kind of scenario that required military-level resources and coordination. "What's our assignment?" Rivera asked. "Proceed to the Valero plant where the first explosion occurred," Captain Rodriguez said. "Federal agents believe that location may have been used as a staging area for the other attacks. Look for any evidence of how the explosives were planted and who might have had access." When Rivera and Chen arrived back at the Valero refinery, the scene had changed dramatically. Fire department crews had contained the initial blazes, but the facility was still partially evacuated and surrounded by emergency vehicles. More importantly, the parking lot had been converted into a federal command center, with FBI and ATF agents setting up sophisticated communication equipment. Agent Foster approached them as they arrived. "Officer Rivera, Agent Mitchell is coordinating the investigation from here. We need you to escort our bomb technicians into the refinery to examine the blast sites." "Any casualties?" Chen asked. "Miraculous. No deaths, only minor injuries, Agent Foster said. But that's because the bombers specifically targeted areas that were evacuated for maintenance. They had detailed knowledge of refinery operations. Rivera felt a chill. Inside information. Has to be, Agent Foster said. Someone with access to maintenance schedules, security protocols, and facility layouts. We're looking at either a current employee or someone who conducted extensive surveillance. As they walked toward the refinery's main entrance, Rivera noticed something that hadn't been there during their earlier visit. Fresh graffiti on the security gate, the distinctive Lee tag that marked MS-13 territory, but with something new added below it. Texas is ours now. Agent Mitchell, the FBI agent who had been in Captain Rodriguez's office earlier, was coordinating with ATF bomb technicians when Rivera and Chen approached. We found the detonation points, Agent Mitchell said. 3 separate locations, all chosen to maximize visual impact while minimizing casualties. This was about sending a message, not causing mass casualties. What kind of message? Rivera asked. That they can strike critical infrastructure at will, Agent Mitchell said. The psychological impact of bombing refineries and chemical plants is enormous, even if the actual damage is limited. A TF Special Agent, Carlos Mendez, was examining blast residue when Rivera's group reached the first explosion site. Mendez was a 15-year veteran who had investigated bombing incidents from Oklahoma City to the World Trade Center attacks. If anyone could determine who was responsible for this attack, it was him. Military-grade plastic explosives, Mendez said without looking up from his analysis. C4 or something very similar, professionally installed with precision timing devices. This wasn't some amateur operation. How much expertise would someone need to pull this off? Chen asked. Military demolitions training, Mendez replied. Or extensive experience with cartel operations in Mexico. The techniques used here are consistent with what we've seen in cartel attacks on government facilities south of the border. Rivera's radio crackled with an update from dispatch that made his blood run cold. All units. We have reports of armed gunmen at Houston Intercontinental Airport. TSA and airport police requesting immediate assistance. This appears to be connected to the ongoing terrorist incidents. Bush Intercontinental Airport was one of the busiest airports in the United States, serving millions of passengers every year. If terrorists were targeting the airport, the potential for mass casualties was enormous. Agent Mitchell, Rivera said, we need to respond to the airport. Negative, Agent Mitchell said. Airport security is federal jurisdiction. Local law enforcement stays focused on the industrial targets. Rivera felt frustration building. MS-13 was clearly coordinating attacks across multiple targets to stretch law enforcement resources as thin as possible. While police and federal agents were focused on the refinery bombings, other teams were striking airports, chemical plants, and who knew what other targets. How many different locations are under attack? Rivera asked. Agent Mitchell consulted her tablet computer, which was displaying real-time updates from law enforcement agencies across the Houston area. Current count is 12 separate incidents, she said. Refineries, chemical plants, shipping terminals, and now the airport. This is impossible, Chen said. MS-13 doesn't have the manpower to coordinate 12 simultaneous attacks. You're right, Agent Foster said, appearing beside them. Which is why we believe they're not working alone. Intelligence suggests this is a joint operation between MS-13, elements of the Zetas cartel, and possibly other criminal organizations. The implications were staggering. If multiple criminal organizations were coordinating to attack Houston's critical infrastructure, the city was facing the kind of threat that required a military response. not just law enforcement. Rivera's cell phone rang. It was Detective Martinez from Gang Division. "Rivera, where are you?" Martinez asked. "Valero Refinery with federal agents," Rivera replied. "I need you and Chen to meet me at the port," Martinez said. "We found something you need to see." The port of Houston was the second largest port in the United States, handling more than 200 million tons of cargo every year. It was also, Rivera realized, the perfect entry point for smuggling weapons, explosives, and personnel into the United States. "What did you find?" Rivera asked. "A shipping container that arrived from Guatemala 3 days ago," Martinez said. "Contents listed as agricultural equipment, but port security found military weapons, explosives, and communication equipment." Rivera felt the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. MS-13 hadn't just been planning to take over the Third Ward drug trade. They had been planning to turn Houston into a base of operations for criminal activities across the entire southwest United States. "How much equipment are we talking about?" Rivera asked. "Enough to outfit a small army," Martinez said. AK-47s, RPGs, plastic explosives, sophisticated radio equipment. This wasn't imported for street gang violence. This was imported for warfare. As Rivera and Chen left the refinery and headed toward the port, Rivera realized that everything they had witnessed over the past 12 hours had been leading to this moment. The apartment murders, the drive-by shooting, Officer Thompson's kidnapping, the refinery bombing, all of it had been preparation for a coordinated assault on Houston's critical infrastructure. But what was the end game? What did MS-13 hope to accomplish by attacking refineries, chemical plants, and airports? Were they trying to take control of the city's criminal enterprises, or were they working for someone else with even more ambitious goals? Looking at the smoke rising from industrial facilities across the Houston Ship Channel, Rivera realized that the gang war he had started investigating that morning had evolved into something much more dangerous. A terrorist attack on one of America's most important cities. And he was beginning to suspect that the worst was yet to come. The port of Houston sprawled across 25 miles of the ship channel, a maze of container yards, shipping terminals, and cargo facilities that never stopped moving. Rivera had driven past the port countless times, but had never been inside the secure areas where international cargo was processed and inspected. Detective Martinez was waiting for them at the main security gate, along with 2 customs and border protection agents and a port security supervisor. The tension in the group was palpable. Everyone understood that whatever they had found in that shipping container had national security implications. Container arrived 3 days ago on the MV Esperanza from Puerto Quetzal, Guatemala, Martinez said as they walked through the security checkpoint. Manifest listed the contents as agricultural machinery destined for a farming cooperative in East Texas. "But the farming cooperative doesn't exist," added CBP agent Sandra Vasquez, a 20-year veteran who specialized in cargo inspection. "The address on the shipping documents leads to a vacant lot in rural East Texas." As they walked through the container yard, Rivera was struck by the sheer scale of international commerce flowing through Houston. Thousands of shipping containers were stacked in precise rows, each one representing goods from every corner of the globe. The idea that weapons and explosives could be smuggled through this system without detection was terrifying. "Here's the container," Agent Vasquez said, stopping in front of a standard 40-foot shipping container painted industrial blue. "We opened it for routine inspection yesterday morning and found this." She unlocked the container doors and swung them open. Zrenia, показавшееся арсеналом. Wooden crates filled with assault rifles were stacked along one wall, while plastic cases containing explosives and detonation devices lined the other. Radio equipment, night vision goggles, and tactical gear were arranged on metal shelving that had been professionally installed inside the container. "Jesus Christ," Chen muttered, staring at the arsenal. "That's not even the worst part," Agent Vasquez said. She led them to the back of the container where a laptop computer was connected to a satellite communication system. This equipment was actively transmitting when we opened the container. Someone was using it to coordinate operations in real time. Rivera examined the communication setup and realized the implications. This wasn't just a weapons shipment. It was a mobile command center that could coordinate criminal operations across a wide area. "Were you able to trace the communications?" Rivera asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Agent Vasquez said. The satellite uplink was connecting to servers in El Salvador, Mexico, and Honduras simultaneously. Whoever was running this operation was coordinating with multiple countries. Detective Martinez opened one of the wooden crates and revealed brand new AK-47 assault rifles still packed in factory grease. "These weapons were manufactured in Romania within the past 6 months," he said. "But they were shipped through a network of arms dealers that included stops in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico before arriving here." Rivera was studying the shipping documents when something caught his attention. "Look at the delivery address," he said, showing the papers to Chen. "It's not just a vacant lot in East Texas. It's specifically in Newton County, right on the Louisiana border." "Why is that significant?" Agent Vasquez asked. "Newton County is where I-10 intersects with several major highways leading to Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin," Rivera explained. "If you wanted to distribute weapons and personnel across Texas, that would be the perfect logistics hub." Chen was examining the radio equipment when she made another disturbing discovery. "These radios are programmed with law enforcement frequencies," she said. They were monitoring police communications across the Houston area. The implication sent a chill down Rivera's spine. If MS-13 had been intercepting police radio traffic, they would have known about every law enforcement response throughout the day. Officer Thompson's kidnapping, the refinery bombing, the multiple diversionary incidents, all of it could have been coordinated using real-time intelligence about police activities. "Agent Vasquez," Rivera said, "when exactly did you open this container?" "Yesterday morning, at approximately 10 a.m., she replied. Rivera felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The container had been opened and the weapons discovered 12 hours before the first apartment murders in the 3rd Ward, which meant MS-13 had known their weapons cache was compromised, but they had proceeded with their operations anyway. "They wanted us to find this," Rivera said. "What do you mean?" Martinez asked. "Think about it," Rivera said. "They ship a container full of weapons through one of the most heavily monitored ports in the United States, using fake documentation that's easy to trace. Then they proceed with coordinated attacks even after customs agents discover their arsenal. This container was meant to be found." "But why?" Chen asked. Rivera was working through the logic when his radio crackled with an urgent call that made everything clear. All units. We have reports of multiple explosions at chemical plants in Beaumont and Port Arthur. Hazmat teams responding. This appears to be coordinated with the Houston attacks. Beaumont and Port Arthur were major petrochemical centers located 90 miles east of Houston, connected to the Houston Ship Channel by the Neches River. If MS-13 was conducting simultaneous attacks on industrial facilities across the entire Texas Gulf Coast, they were dealing with something far more ambitious than anyone had imagined. "They wanted us to focus on Houston while they hit targets across the region," Rivera said. "This container was a diversion to keep law enforcement concentrated here while they attacked chemical plants in other cities." Agent Vasquez was already on her radio, coordinating with federal agencies across Texas and Louisiana. Rivera realized that what had started as a gang war in the Third Ward had evolved into a coordinated terrorist attack on America's petrochemical infrastructure. "How many facilities have been attacked?" Chen asked. Agent Vasquez consulted her tablet computer, which was displaying real-time updates from law enforcement agencies across the region. "Current count is 23 separate incidents across Texas and Louisiana," she said. "Refineries, chemical plants, shipping terminals, and pipeline facilities." Rivera felt overwhelmed by the scale of the operation. 23 simultaneous attacks required a level of coordination, resources, and manpower that went far beyond what any street gang could manage. This was beginning to look like an act of war. "Agent Vasquez," Rivera said, "I need to ask you something. How long does it take to plan an operation of this scale?" "Months, maybe years," she replied. "The logistics alone, importing weapons, recruiting personnel, conducting surveillance of target facilities, coordinating timing across multiple states. You're talking about an extremely sophisticated operation." "Which means this has been in planning since long before Officer Thompson's traffic stop yesterday," Rivera said. "Thompson didn't stumble onto their operation. His traffic stop was part of their plan." Detective Martinez looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Rivera said. "Thompson stops a car carrying $200,000 in cash and detailed maps of drug distribution routes. But instead of trying to avoid law enforcement attention, MS-13 escalates to kidnapping a police officer and bombing industrial facilities. That doesn't make sense unless they wanted to provoke a massive law enforcement response." Rivera's cell phone rang. It was Captain Rodriguez calling from HPD headquarters. "Rivera, we need you back at headquarters immediately," Captain Rodriguez said. "Federal authorities are implementing emergency protocols, and we need all gang division liaisons for briefing." "What kind of emergency protocols?" Rivera asked. "The kind that involve the National Guard," Captain Rodriguez said. As Rivera and Chen left the port and headed back toward downtown Houston, Rivera could see military helicopters beginning to appear in the sky above the city. The Houston Ship Channel was one of the most strategically important waterways in the United States, and the coordinated attacks on petrochemical facilities represented a direct threat to national security. But Rivera was still bothered by the question of motive. Why would MS-13 want to provoke a military response? What could they possibly gain from turning Houston into a war zone? Looking at the smoke rising from industrial facilities across the horizon, Rivera realized that the answer to that question would determine whether Houston was facing a terrorist attack that would end in arrests and prosecutions, or something much worse that would fundamentally change the city forever. HPD headquarters had been transformed into a military command center. Rivera counted at least 50 federal agents from various agencies: FBI, DEA, ATF, Homeland Security, and others he didn't recognize, setting up communication equipment and coordinating with officials in Washington. Military liaisons wearing Army uniforms were huddled around maps of the Houston metropolitan area, while bank of television screens displayed live footage from helicopter surveillance of the various attack sites. Captain Rodriguez intercepted Rivera and Chen as they entered the building. "Conference room 3, she said. "Federal briefing starts in 5 minutes." The conference room was packed with law enforcement officials from across the region. Rivera recognized commanders from the Harris County Sheriff's Office, Texas State Police, and various municipal departments. But there were also officials he didn't recognize, people wearing suits without identification badges, and military officers whose unit patches had been removed. Agent Mitchell from the FBI stood at the front of the room, beside a large display screen showing a map of Texas and Louisiana with red dots marking each attack location. Rivera counted 28 red dots scattered across the map from Houston to New Orleans. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Mitchell began, "we are dealing with the largest coordinated terrorist attack on U.S. soil since September 11th. 28 industrial facilities have been attacked in the past 6 hours, with damage estimates already exceeding $2 billion. Rivera felt his stomach drop. $2 billion in damage meant this wasn't just about gang territory or drug routes anymore. This was economic warfare on a scale that could destabilize the entire Gulf Coast economy. Intelligence analysis suggests this operation has been in planning for at least 18 months, Agent Mitchell continued. The coordination required: simultaneous attacks across multiple states, sophisticated explosive devices, real-time communication intercepts, indicates state-level sponsorship. "State level?" asked a commander from the Harris County Sheriff's Office. "You mean foreign government involvement?" "We can't rule it out," Agent Mitchell said. The weapons found in the Port of Houston shipping container were manufactured in Romania and shipped through a network that included stops in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Honduras. That level of international coordination requires resources beyond what criminal organizations typically possess. A man in a dark suit, whom Rivera didn't recognize, stood up from the back of the room. "Agent Mitchell, can you brief us on the current threat assessment?" "The immediate threat is ongoing," Agent Mitchell said. "We have reports of suspicious activity at petrochemical facilities in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. This attack may be expanding beyond Texas." Rivera's radio crackled with an urgent call that made everyone in the room tense up. All units. Explosion reported at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Facility in Freeport. This is a federal facility. All units maintain distance and await federal instructions. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was where the United States government stored emergency oil supplies for national security purposes. An attack on that facility represented a direct assault on critical infrastructure that could affect the entire country's energy security. "That changes everything," said the unidentified man in the dark suit. "If they're targeting federal energy reserves, this is an act of war." Agent Mitchell was receiving updates through an earpiece when her expression suddenly became grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that similar attacks are being reported in refineries near Los Angeles and Philadelphia. This is no longer a regional incident. This is a coordinated assault on America's energy infrastructure." Rivera felt the room's atmosphere shift as the implications sank in. If terrorist organizations were conducting simultaneous attacks on petrochemical facilities across multiple states, the economic and security consequences could be catastrophic. "What's our role in the federal response?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Local law enforcement will focus on securing the immediate Houston area, while federal agencies coordinate the broader investigation," Agent Mitchell said. "But we need your knowledge of local gang operations to understand how MS-13 fits into this larger picture." Detective Martinez raised his hand. "Agent Mitchell, our intelligence suggests MS-13 has been recruiting heavily from Central American refugee populations in the Houston area. Could this attack be connected to destabilization efforts in Central America?" "That's one theory we're investigating," Agent Mitchell said. "But we're also looking at the possibility that criminal organizations are being used as proxies by hostile nations that want to damage American economic interests." Rivera thought about the shipping container full of weapons and communication equipment they had discovered at the port. The sophisticated satellite communication system could have been used to coordinate operations across vast distances, potentially even receiving instructions from foreign countries. "Agent Mitchell," Rivera said, "the communication equipment we found at the port was actively transmitting when customs agents opened the container. Were you able to trace those transmissions to their source? We're working on that, Agent Mitchell said. But the signals were being bounced through multiple satellite networks and servers in different countries. Tracing them to their ultimate source will take time. Rivera's cell phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When he read it, he felt ice water flowing through his veins. Officer Rivera, we know where you live. We know where your family works. Stop the investigation, or they die tonight. Mess 3. Rivera showed the message to Chen, whose face went pale. Threatening police officers' families was crossing a line that even the most violent gangs rarely approached. It suggested a level of desperation or confidence that worried Rivera deeply. Agent Mitchell, Rivera said, holding up his phone, I just received a direct threat from MS-13. They're threatening my family if I continue working this investigation. Agent Mitchell examined the text message and immediately began making calls on her cell phone. We're implementing protective custody protocols for all law enforcement personnel involved in this investigation, she said. Your families will be relocated to secure facilities until this threat is resolved. Rivera felt anger building alongside his fear. He had been a police officer for 8 years and had faced dangerous situations before, but threatening innocent family members was an escalation that made this personal. How many other officers have received similar threats? Rivera asked. Preliminary reports suggest at least 20 law enforcement officers across Texas and Louisiana have received threatening messages in the past hour, Agent Mitchell said. This appears to be a coordinated intimidation campaign. The unidentified man in the dark suit approached Rivera. Officer Rivera, I'm Deputy Director James Harrison from the Department of Homeland Security. I need to ask you some questions about your investigation in the 3rd Ward. What kind of questions? Rivera asked. We believe your initial response to the apartment murders this morning may have inadvertently disrupted a much larger operation, Harrison said. MS-13 may have accelerated their timeline because they realized law enforcement was getting too close to their plans. Rivera thought back to the morning's events. The 3 bodies in the apartment, the drive-by shooting at Wheeler and Blodgett, the discovery that all 3 victims were known associates of the Screwston soldiers. At the time, it had seemed like typical gang violence, but viewed in the context of the coordinated terrorist attacks, those murders took on a different significance. You think the apartment murders were supposed to happen later? Rivera asked. We think they were supposed to happen simultaneously with the industrial bombings, Harrison said. By responding quickly to the apartment murders, you forced MS-13 to adjust their timeline and operate with less coordination than they had planned. Chen looked confused. But how does killing 3 gang members in an apartment relate to bombing refineries and chemical plants? The apartment murders were meant to eliminate witnesses, Harrison said. All 3 victims had been recruited to work security for MS-13's operations in the Houston area. They had detailed knowledge of target locations, timing, and escape routes. MS-13 was planning to kill them after the attacks to eliminate loose ends. Rivera felt sick as he realized the implications. So, by investigating those murders, we inadvertently saved their lives? Possibly, Harrison said. But more importantly, you forced MS-13 to proceed with their attacks while those witnesses were still alive and potentially able to provide intelligence to law enforcement. Rivera's radio crackled with another urgent call. All units. Armed suspects have taken hostages at the Williams Tower downtown. This appears to be connected to the ongoing terrorist incidents. SWAT teams responding. Williams Tower was a 64-story skyscraper in the heart of Houston's business district. one of the most recognizable buildings in the city's skyline. If terrorists were taking hostages there, they were escalating from infrastructure attacks to directly threatening civilian lives. "Agent Mitchell," Rivera said, "my partner and I know the Third Ward better than anyone. If MS-13 is using that area as a base of operations, we can help federal agents navigate the territory and identify potential hiding spots." "Negative," Agent Mitchell said. "Given the direct threats against you and your family, you're being pulled from active duty and placed in protective custody immediately." Rivera felt frustration building. "Agent Mitchell, with all due respect, I've been working these streets for 8 years. I know every gang member, every drug corner, every safe house in the Third Ward. You need local knowledge to find these people." "And they know you," Agent Mitchell said, "which makes you a liability in a covert operation." Rivera was about to argue when Deputy Director Harrison interrupted. "Actually, Agent Mitchell, Officer Rivera's visibility might be an asset rather than a liability. If MS-13 is monitoring law enforcement response, seeing familiar faces might make them overconfident." Agent Mitchell looked skeptical. "You want to use Officer Rivera as bait? I want to use Officer Rivera's knowledge and experience to help federal agents understand the operational environment," Harrison said. "But yes, his visibility might also help us identify MS-13 positions and resources." Rivera realized they were talking about using him as a target to draw out MS-13 operatives. It was risky, but it might be the fastest way to locate and neutralize the terrorist network before they could conduct more attacks. "I'm willing to do it," Rivera said, "but I want assurance that my family is protected." "Already in motion," Harrison said. "Protective details are being dispatched to your home and your partner's family as well." Chen grabbed Rivera's arm. "Marcus, this is insane. You're talking about painting a target on your back." "Chen, if we don't stop these people, the entire Gulf Coast energy infrastructure could be crippled," Rivera said. "The economic damage could affect millions of people." Agent Mitchell was receiving updates through her earpiece when her expression became urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that the President is being briefed on this situation in the White House Situation Room. National Guard units are being mobilized across Texas and Louisiana." Rivera looked around the conference room at the faces of law enforcement officials who had suddenly found themselves dealing with a national security crisis that none of them had been trained for. This was no longer about gang violence in the Third Ward. This was about defending American critical infrastructure against what appeared to be an act of war. And somewhere in the maze of streets, abandoned buildings, and industrial facilities that surrounded Houston, the people responsible for this attack were planning their next move. Rivera just hoped that federal resources and military support would arrive before MS-13 could complete whatever operation they had been planning all along. Williams Tower pierced the Houston skyline like a giant needle, its distinctive profile visible from every corner of the city. Rivera had driven past it thousands of times during his 8 years with HPD, but he'd never imagined he would be planning a tactical operation against terrorists who had seized control of one of Texas's most prominent buildings. The Federal Command Center had been relocated to a parking garage 3 blocks from Williams Tower, where Agent Mitchell was coordinating with SWAT teams, federal tactical units, and military special operations personnel who had arrived from bases across Texas. Rivera counted at least 200 law enforcement officers staging for what was clearly going to be the most complex urban operation in Houston's history. "What's the situation inside the building?" Rivera asked Agent Mitchell as he and Chen arrived at the command center. "Approximately 40 hostages on the 42nd floor," Agent Mitchell said. "The terrorists appear to have taken control of the offices of Pemex Oil Trading. which handles petroleum distribution contracts for the Mexican government. Rivera felt a chill as the implications became clear. Pemex was Mexico's national oil company, and their Houston office managed billions of dollars in crude oil transactions between Mexico and the United States. If MS-13 was targeting that specific office, they weren't just conducting terrorist attacks, they were trying to disrupt international energy markets. "Any communication from the hostage takers?" Chen asked. "One phone call to local news media," Agent Mitchell said. "They're demanding the release of MS-13 members from federal prisons across the United States, plus safe passage to a country of their choosing. Standard terrorist demands that we obviously can't meet." Deputy Director Harrison appeared beside them, wearing tactical gear and looking like he was preparing for combat operations. "Officer Rivera, we need your assessment of this situation from a local gang perspective. Does this hostage crisis fit with MS-13's typical operational patterns?" Rivera thought about it carefully. MS-13 was known for extreme violence, but their operations usually focused on drug trafficking, human smuggling, and territorial control. Taking hostages in a downtown skyscraper was a dramatic escalation that didn't fit their normal profile. "This feels different," Rivera said. MS-13 usually operates in neighborhoods they control, using intimidation and violence against rival gangs or uncooperative civilians. Taking hostages in a downtown office building exposes them to law enforcement response without providing any strategic advantage. "Unless the hostage crisis isn't about the hostages," Harrison said. "What do you mean?" Chen asked. "Think about it," Harrison said. "Every law enforcement agency in Texas is now focused on Williams Tower. SWAT teams, federal tactical units, military special operations, all concentrated in downtown Houston while petrochemical facilities across the region remain vulnerable to follow-up attacks." Rivera realized Harrison was right. The hostage crisis was another diversion, designed to concentrate law enforcement resources in one location, while MS-13 continued their assault on critical infrastructure. "How many facilities have been attacked so far?" Rivera asked. Agent Mitchell consulted her tablet computer. 31 confirmed incidents across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Damage estimates are approaching $3 billion. Rivera felt overwhelmed by the scale of the operation. $3 billion in damage to petrochemical infrastructure would have ripple effects throughout the American economy, potentially causing gasoline shortages, chemical supply disruptions, and industrial shutdowns that could last for months. "Agent Mitchell," Rivera said, "what if the hostage crisis is designed to keep us here while they attack something even more critical?" "Like what?" Agent Mitchell asked. Rivera was thinking about Houston's role as America's energy capital when the answer hit him. "The refineries that are still operational," he said. "If they can damage enough refining capacity, they can create artificial shortages that would drive energy prices through the roof." Agent Mitchell was making calls on her cell phone when Rivera's radio crackled with a report that confirmed his worst fears. All units. Explosions reported at the ExxonMobil refinery in Baytown. This is the largest refinery complex in the United States. All emergency personnel respond immediately. The ExxonMobil Baytown refinery processed more than 500,000 barrels of crude oil per day, making it one of the most important energy facilities in North America. An attack on that facility could cripple gasoline production across the entire South and Midwest. "They're escalating," Harrison said. "First, they hit smaller facilities to test our response. Now they're going after the major installations that really matter." Rivera's cell phone rang. It was his wife, calling from the secure location where federal agents had relocated his family. "Marcus, what's happening?" she asked. "The agents won't tell us anything except that we need to stay here for our safety." "Honey, I can't explain everything right now, but Houston is under attack by terrorists," Rivera said. "Federal agents are keeping you safe while we work to stop them." "How long do we have to stay here?" she asked. Rivera looked around at the massive law enforcement mobilization surrounding Williams Tower and realized he didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he said, "but I promise I'll come get you as soon as it's safe." After ending the call, Rivera felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about stopping terrorists anymore. It was about protecting his family and thousands of other innocent people who were caught in the middle of an attack they couldn't understand or escape. Agent Mitchell approached with an update that made the situation even more complex. "We've established communication with the hostage takers," she said. "They're demanding to speak specifically with local law enforcement officers who have been investigating gang activity in the 3rd Ward." "They want to talk to us?" Jen asked. "Specifically, Officer Rivera," Agent Mitchell said. They mentioned him by name. Rivera felt a chill despite the Houston heat. MS-13 hadn't just been monitoring police radio communications. They had been tracking individual officers and their involvement in the investigation. "What do they want to discuss?" Rivera asked. "They claim to have information about additional attacks that are planned for tonight," Agent Mitchell said. "But they'll only share that information in exchange for specific concessions." Deputy Director Harrison was skeptical. "It's probably a trap designed to get local officers inside the building where they can be taken hostage." "Maybe," Rivera said. "But what if they really do have information about additional attacks? If they're planning to hit more refineries tonight, thousands of people could be killed." Agent Mitchell was receiving updates through her earpiece when her expression became urgent. "We just lost communication with the Chevron refinery in Pasadena," she said. "Security cameras went dark 5 minutes ago, and plant personnel aren't responding to radio calls." Rivera realized the terrorists were continuing their assault on petrochemical infrastructure, while law enforcement remained focused on the hostage crisis. Every minute they spent planning a response to Williams Tower was another minute MS-13 could use to attack facilities that were critical to America's energy security. "Agent Mitchell," Rivera said, "I think we need to talk to them. If there's any chance they can provide intelligence about additional attacks, we have to take that risk. The risk is that you become another hostage," Agent Mitchell said. "The risk is that they bomb every refinery on the Gulf Coast while we're standing here debating," Rivera replied. Chen grabbed his arm. "Marcus, don't do this. Your family needs you to come home alive." Rivera looked at his partner, who had been beside him through 8 years of patrol work in some of Houston's most dangerous neighborhoods. He thought about his wife and children waiting in federal protective custody, and about the thousands of other families whose lives could be destroyed if the terrorist attacks continued. "Jen, if we don't stop these people tonight, there might not be much of a city left for our families to come home to," Rivera said. Agent Mitchell was coordinating with federal tactical teams when she turned back to Rivera. "If you're serious about this, we'll establish communication protocols that allow you to talk to the hostage takers from outside the building. But under no circumstances are you going inside." Rivera nodded, but he was already calculating the layout of Williams Tower and the likely positions of MS-13 operatives inside. If they really did have information about additional attacks, he might not have a choice about going inside. Looking up at the 64-story tower that dominated the Houston skyline, Rivera realized that the next few hours would determine whether the coordinated terrorist attacks would be contained or whether they would succeed in crippling America's energy infrastructure. And somehow, a patrol officer from the 3rd Ward had become a key player in stopping the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil since September 11th. Rivera sat in his patrol car at the intersection of Scott and Belfort, watching the morning traffic flow through the Third Ward. The neighborhood looked much the same as it had 3 months ago. The same apartment complexes, the same corner stores, the same groups of young men hanging out on street corners. But Rivera knew that everything had changed. The coordinated terrorist attacks had been stopped, but not before causing more than $4 billion in damage to petrochemical facilities across the Gulf Coast. 37 industrial facilities had been bombed or attacked. 16 law enforcement officers had been wounded, and more than 300 people had been hospitalized due to chemical exposure from damaged plants. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond MS-13 or even cartel involvement. Intelligence agencies had discovered evidence linking the attacks to a network of hostile nations that had coordinated to damage American energy infrastructure and destabilize the Gulf Coast economy. MS-13 had been used as a proxy force, supplied with weapons and intelligence by foreign agents who wanted to attack America without leaving direct fingerprints. Officer Marcus Thompson had survived his kidnapping and returned to duty, though he had requested transfer to a quieter patrol division in northwest Houston. Detective Martinez had been promoted to lieutenant and was now commanding the expanded gang division that had been created in response to the terrorist threat. Chen had been accepted into the FBI's specialized counterterrorism program and would be leaving Houston next month for training at Quantico. Rivera would miss his partner, but he understood why she wanted to take her career in a new direction after experiencing threats against her family. As for Rivera himself, he had declined several offers to join federal agencies or transfer to specialized units within HPD. Instead, he had requested to return to patrol duty in the Third Ward, the neighborhood where the investigation had begun. Unit 47, this is dispatch, his radio crackled. We have a report of shots fired at the Magnolia Gardens apartment complex on Scott Street. Can you respond? Rivera felt a familiar chill as he heard the address. The same apartment complex where he had discovered 3 bodies execution style 3 months earlier. But this time, he wasn't responding alone. Federal agents maintained a permanent presence in the Third Ward now, and every gang-related incident was treated as a potential national security threat. Unit 47 responding, Rivera said into his radio. As he drove toward the apartment complex, Rivera reflected on the lessons he had learned during those terrifying hours when Houston came under attack. The most important lesson was that local law enforcement could no longer afford to think of gang violence as a purely local problem. In an interconnected world, street gangs could be used as proxy forces by hostile nations or terrorist organizations with global reach. But Rivera had also learned that the fundamental skills of police work, building relationships with community members, understanding local criminal networks, and paying attention to details that might seem insignificant, remained as important as ever. It had been a routine patrol response to an apartment murder that ultimately helped federal agents unravel a terrorist conspiracy that threatened national security. When Rivera arrived at the Magnolia Gardens apartment complex, he found a scene that was both familiar and different. The same red brick buildings, the same parking lot where residents gathered to watch police operations, the same sense of tension that pervaded the neighborhood whenever violence erupted. But this time, there were no bodies, no evidence of gunfire, and no gang members fleeing the scene. Instead, Rivera found Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had been a witness to the original apartment murders, sitting on her porch with a group of neighborhood children around her. "Officer Rivera," she called out as he approached. "I'm so glad you're back in the neighborhood." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Rivera said, "we got a call about shots fired. Are you and the children okay?" "Oh, that," she said with a wave of her hand. "That was just firecrackers. These children were celebrating because the community center is reopening next week." Rivera looked around and noticed things he hadn't seen 3 months earlier. New playground equipment had been installed in the apartment complex courtyard. Fresh paint-covered walls that had been scarred by graffiti. Young men who would have been posting up on corners were instead wearing work clothes and heading to construction jobs. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Rivera said, "the neighborhood looks different. Things change when people feel safe," she said. "After what happened here, the city started investing in the community. Jobs programs, youth centers, college scholarships. Turns out the best way to fight gangs is to give young people something better to do." Rivera realized that the terrorist attacks, as devastating as they had been, had also created opportunities for positive change. Federal funding had flowed into communities like the Third Ward, providing resources for education, job training, and community development that had been lacking for decades. As he walked back to his patrol car, Rivera's radio crackled with another call. "Unit 4-7, this is dispatch. We have a report of a suspicious person at the intersection of Wheeler and Blodgett. Caller says individual appears to be conducting surveillance of the area." Wheeler and Blodgett, the corner where MS-13 had conducted their drive-by shooting 3 months earlier. Rivera felt his pulse quicken as he realized that threats to the Third Ward hadn't ended with the arrest of the terrorist network. "Unit 47 responding to Wheeler and Blodgett," Rivera said into his radio. As he drove toward the intersection, Rivera reflected on the fact that police work never really ended. There would always be new criminals, new threats, new challenges that required the same fundamental combination of courage, intelligence, and community engagement that had defined law enforcement for generations. But Rivera also knew that he was now part of a larger network of professionals, federal agents, military personnel, intelligence analysts, and community organizers, who were all working to protect American communities from threats that could emerge from anywhere in the world. When he arrived at Wheeler and Blodgett, Rivera found that the suspicious person was actually a surveyor working for the city's Public Works Department, measuring the intersection for a traffic improvement project. The corner that had been a drug market and the site of terrorist violence was being converted into a safer space for the community. As Rivera completed his report and prepared to clear the call, he received a text message from Chen, who was completing her final week with HPD before leaving for FBI training. "Marcus, just wanted to thank you for being the best partner anyone could ask for. Keep Houston safe for all of us." Rivera smiled as he typed his response. "Stay safe, Agent Chen. Houston will always be home." Looking around at the Third Ward neighborhood that had been the starting point for a terrorist investigation that reached around the world, Rivera realized that the most important battles in the war against crime and terrorism were still fought on street corners and in apartment complexes where individual officers made split-second decisions that could change everything. And as long as police officers like him were willing to respond to calls in dangerous neighborhoods, to build relationships with community members, and to pursue investigations wherever they led, America's communities would have defenders who understood that protecting freedom required constant vigilance. Rivera put his patrol car in drive and headed toward whatever call would come next, knowing that in a city like Houston, there was always more work to be done. Officer Sarah Valdez had been working narcotics enforcement with the Dallas Police Department for 6 years, but she'd never seen a drug seizure quite like the one that changed everything on that scorching August afternoon. The thermometer outside the North Dallas substation read 108 degrees, and the asphalt on Interstate 35 was so hot it was buckling in places, creating mirages that made the highway shimmer like water. The call had come in as a routine traffic stop gone wrong. Officer Tommy Chen from Highway Patrol had pulled over a late-model Suburban with Mexican plates for speeding near the Louisville exit, about 20 miles north of downtown Dallas. What should have been a simple citation had turned into something much more complicated when Chen's drug detection dog had alerted on the vehicle. "Valdez, you need to get up here now." Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "This isn't just a few kilos. This is industrial-scale distribution." Valdez had been a Dallas cop long enough to know that I-35 was one of the primary drug trafficking corridors in the United States. The interstate ran straight from the Mexican border in Laredo to the Canadian border in Minnesota, passing through every major drug market in between. Dallas sat right in the middle of that corridor, making it a natural distribution hub for cartels moving product from Mexico to markets across the Midwest and East Coast. But even experienced narcotics officers rarely encountered the kind of massive seizures that made national news. Most drug interdiction involved smaller amounts, a few pounds of cocaine hidden in spare tires, maybe some heroin concealed in false compartments. The really big shipments usually made it through because they looked too legitimate to attract attention. When Valdez arrived at the traffic stop location, she immediately understood why Chen had called for backup. The black Suburban was sitting on the shoulder of I-35 with its doors and rear hatch wide open, revealing an interior that had been completely modified for drug smuggling. Custom-built compartments lined every available space, each one packed with neatly wrapped packages of what appeared to be pure cocaine. "Jesus Christ," Valdez muttered as she surveyed the haul. "How much are we looking at?" "Preliminary count suggests around 400 kilos, Chen replied. "Street value somewhere north of $20 million. Valdez felt her pulse quicken. A $20 million drug seizure would make headlines across Texas and attract attention from federal agencies that usually operated beyond the reach of local police departments. But it would also put a target on the backs of every officer involved in the bust. "Where's the driver?" Valdez asked. Chen pointed toward his patrol car, where a Hispanic male in his 30s was sitting in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind his back. The man was well-dressed, designer clothes, expensive watch, manicured fingernails, not the typical profile of a drug mule or low-level trafficker. "Says his name is Miguel Santos," Chen said. "Claims he's a legitimate businessman from Nuevo Laredo who was driving to a meeting in Dallas. Says he has no idea how the drugs got in his vehicle." Valdez walked over to Chen's patrol car and studied the suspect through the rear window. Santos was calm, composed, and showed no signs of the nervous behavior typically displayed by people caught with large quantities of illegal drugs. His body language suggested someone who was confident that his situation would be resolved quickly and favorably. "You run his identification yet?" Valdez asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Chen said. "His Mexican driver's license and passport both check out as legitimate. But when I ran his name through our database, it came back flagged by DEA intelligence as a suspected money laundering operative for the Gulf Cartel. The Gulf Cartel was one of Mexico's oldest and most sophisticated criminal organizations, with operations that extended far beyond drug trafficking into kidnapping, human smuggling, and corruption of government officials. If Santos was connected to the Gulf Cartel, this traffic stop had just become a federal case. Valdez's radio crackled with an urgent call that made her blood run cold. "Unit 7-4, this is dispatch. We have reports of shots fired at the Walmart on Forest Lane. Multiple callers reporting automatic weapons fire in the parking lot. All available units respond." Forest Lane was less than 10 miles from their current location, and Walmart parking lots were common locations for drug-related violence when deals went wrong or territorial disputes erupted between competing organizations. "Chen, you thinking this is connected?" Valdez asked. "Has to be," Chen replied. 400 kilos of cocaine doesn't just disappear without someone noticing. If Santos was supposed to deliver that product to distributors in Dallas, there are probably some very unhappy people looking for answers. As if to confirm Chen's theory, Valdez noticed something that made her stomach clench. A late-model Ford F-150 pickup truck had been parked on the opposite side of I-35 for the past 10 minutes, positioned so the occupants could observe the traffic stop. Through her binoculars, she could see at least 2 people in the truck, and one of them appeared to be filming the police operation with a cell phone. "Chen, we've got watchers," Valdez said, pointing toward the pickup truck. Chen followed her gaze and immediately reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 5-2. I need additional units for traffic stop surveillance. We have unknown subjects monitoring our location from the northbound side of I-35. Before dispatch could respond, the pickup truck suddenly accelerated and merged into traffic, disappearing into the flow of vehicles heading toward downtown Dallas. But Valdez had gotten the license plate number, and she was already calling it in for a records check. "Truck comes back registered to a shell company in McAllen," dispatch reported back. "Company address is a vacant lot near the border." McAllen was right on the Mexican border, less than 10 miles from Reynosa, which was controlled by the Gulf Cartel. A vehicle registered to a fake company in that area was almost certainly connected to cartel operations. Valdez's cell phone rang. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez from the Narcotics Division. "Valdez, I'm hearing reports about a major seizure on I-35, Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "How major are we talking?" 400 kilos of cocaine, Lieutenant. Maybe more once we get everything properly weighed and tested." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. "Valdez, you and Chen need to secure that scene and wait for federal agents. DEA is en route, and they're bringing their own crime scene technicians." "How long until they arrive?" Valdez asked. 20 minutes, maybe 30, Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "But Valdez, I need you to understand something. A seizure this size is going to have consequences. The people who lost this product are going to be looking for someone to blame, and they're going to want their money back." Valdez understood what the lieutenant was implying. Cartel operations were businesses, and losing $20 million worth of product created debts that had to be paid by someone. If the cartels couldn't recover their drugs or get compensation from whoever was responsible for the loss, they would seek revenge against anyone they perceived as being involved. "Lieutenant, what's our security protocol for something like this?" Valdez asked. "I'm assigning protective details for you and Chen until we can assess the threat level," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "And I'm recommending that both of you relocate your families to secure locations until this situation is resolved." Valdez felt ice water flowing through her veins. She had been a narcotics officer long enough to know that cartel retaliation could target not just law enforcement officers, but their spouses, children, and extended family members. The cartels used family threats as a way to discourage aggressive enforcement and intimidate officers into backing down from investigations. "Lieutenant, how often do cartels actually follow through on threats against police families?" Valdez asked. "Often enough that we take every threat seriously," Lieutenant Rodriguez replied. "These organizations have unlimited resources and a complete disregard for innocent life. If they decide you're a problem, they won't hesitate to make an example that other officers will remember." As Valdez was talking to Lieutenant Rodriguez, she noticed something that made her heart race. Miguel Santos, the suspect sitting in Chen's patrol car, was smiling. Not the nervous smile of someone trying to appear cooperative, but the confident smile of someone who knew something that the police officers didn't. "Chen," Valdez said, after ending her call with Lieutenant Rodriguez, "look at Santos." Chen turned toward his patrol car and immediately understood what Valdez was seeing. Santos was watching the police activity with the detached interest of someone observing a situation he had been expecting. "You think he wanted to get caught?" Chen asked. "I think this whole thing was orchestrated," Valdez said. 400 kilos of cocaine, a suspect who's too calm, watchers monitoring our response from across the highway. This feels like a setup." "But a setup for what?" Chen asked. Before Valdez could answer, her radio erupted with calls from multiple units across Dallas. Unit 3-7, shots fired at the Home Depot on Skillman Street. Multiple suspects fleeing the scene. Unit 6-2, armed robbery in progress at the Chase Bank on Greenville Avenue. Suspects described as Hispanic males with automatic weapons. Unit 8-1, explosion reported at the truck stop on I-20. Fire department responding. Valdez and Chen looked at each other with growing alarm. Multiple incidents across Dallas, all occurring within an hour of their drug seizure, suggested a coordinated operation designed to stretch police resources thin and create maximum chaos. "They're creating diversions," Valdez said. "While we're focused on this traffic stop, they're hitting targets all over the city." Chen's radio crackled with an urgent call that confirmed Valdez's suspicions. All units. We have reports of a kidnapping at the Galleria Mall. Armed suspects have taken hostages in the food court. This appears to be connected to ongoing incidents across the city. The Galleria was one of Dallas's premier shopping destinations, located in the heart of the city's business district. If armed suspects were taking hostages there, the situation had escalated from drug enforcement to terrorism. Valdez looked at Miguel Santos, who was still sitting calmly in the back of Chen's patrol car with that confident smile on his face. Whatever was happening across Dallas, Santos had been expecting it. "Chen, I think we just stumbled into something a lot bigger than a drug seizure," Valdez said. "Like what?" Chen asked. Valdez was studying the packages of cocaine visible in Santos's vehicle when the answer became clear. Each package was marked with the same distinctive logo, a stylized eagle with spread wings. She had seen that logo before in DEA intelligence briefings about Gulf cartel operations. But more importantly, she remembered seeing it in a briefing about a new cartel strategy of using high-profile drug seizures to distract law enforcement while conducting other criminal operations in the same city. "Chen, this isn't about the drugs," Valdez said. "The drugs were bait. They wanted us to find them." "But why would a cartel want to lose $20 million worth of cocaine?" Chen asked. Valdez looked toward downtown Dallas, where smoke was beginning to rise from several locations as the coordinated attacks continued. "Because whatever they're really doing is worth a lot more than $20 million. The DEA field office in Dallas occupied 3 floors of a nondescript building in the medical district, designed to blend in with the surrounding hospitals and research facilities. Valdez had been there several times for joint task force meetings, but never as the primary officer on a case that had attracted federal attention at the highest levels. Special Agent Maria Contreras had been tracking Gulf cartel operations in Texas for 8 years, building cases that had resulted in dozens of arrests and hundreds of millions of dollars in seized assets. But when she examined the evidence from the I-35 traffic stop, her expression suggested she was seeing something that genuinely worried her. "Officer Valdez, this seizure doesn't fit the Gulf cartel's normal operational patterns," Agent Contreras said as she studied photographs of Santos's vehicle. "They typically use multiple smaller shipments to minimize losses if one gets intercepted. 400 kilos in a single vehicle represents a massive operational risk." "Unless they wanted it to be intercepted," Valdez suggested. "That's exactly what I'm thinking," Agent Contreras said. "But the question is why. What could the Gulf Cartel accomplish by deliberately sacrificing $20 million worth of cocaine? Valdez had been thinking about that question since the coordinated attacks began across Dallas. The pattern of incidents, armed robberies, explosions, hostage situations, suggested something more sophisticated than typical cartel retaliation for a drug seizure. Agent Contreras, what if the drug seizure was designed to draw law enforcement attention away from something else? Valdez asked. Like what? Agent Contreras asked. Like moving something more valuable than cocaine through Dallas while we were focused on the traffic stop, Valdez said. Agent Contreras pulled up a digital map of Dallas on her computer screen, showing the locations of all the incidents that had occurred since Santos's arrest. The pattern that emerged was revealing. The incidents formed a rough perimeter around the central business district, like a security cordon designed to keep law enforcement away from downtown. Look at this, Agent Contreras said, pointing to the map. Every incident is positioned to block major routes into the business district. If someone wanted to move large amounts of money or other assets through downtown Dallas without police interference, this would be an effective way to do it. Valdez studied the map and realized Agent Contreras was right. The coordinated attacks weren't random violence. They were strategically positioned to create a law enforcement free zone in the heart of Dallas's financial district. Money laundering operation? Valdez asked. Possibly, Agent Contreras said. But it would have to be enormous to justify sacrificing $20 million worth of cocaine as a diversion. Agent Contreras's computer chimed with an urgent message from the DEA Intelligence Center. When she read it, her face went pale. Officer Valdez, we may have a bigger problem than we thought, Agent Contreras said. Intelligence reports indicate that Miguel Santos isn't just a money laundering operative. He's the nephew of Joaquin Santos, who's the Gulf Cartel's primary financial officer. Valdez felt her stomach drop. If Santos was related to high-level cartel leadership, his arrest represented a major escalation that would provoke a response far beyond typical drug enforcement retaliation. How high up is Joaquin Santos in the cartel hierarchy? Valdez asked. Top 5, Agent Contreras said. He controls billions of dollars in cartel assets and has connections to corrupt officials in both Mexico and the United States. If we're holding his nephew, he's going to do whatever it takes to get him back. Valdez's radio crackled with an update from Dallas PD Dispatch that made the situation even more complex. All units. The hostage situation at the Galleria Mall has been resolved. Suspects released all hostages and surrendered without resistance. No shots fired, no injuries reported. Valdez and Agent Contreras looked at each other with growing confusion. Hostage takers who surrendered without demanding anything didn't fit any known criminal pattern. That doesn't make sense, Valdez said. Why take hostages if you're not going to use them for leverage? Unless the hostage situation was another diversion, Agent Contreras said. How long did that incident tie up law enforcement resources? Valdez checked her watch. About 2 hours. Every SWAT team in Dallas was focused on the Galleria. Agent Contreras was making calls on her secure phone line when Valdez's cell phone rang. It was Officer Chen calling from the county jail where Miguel Santos was being processed. Valdez, you need to hear this, Chen said. Santos just made his phone call and he wasn't calling a lawyer. Who was he calling? Valdez asked. A number in the Cayman Islands, Chen said. And he was speaking in what sounded like financial code. Words like transfer, authorization, and liquidation. Valdez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The coordinated attacks across Dallas hadn't been about getting Santos released. They had been about buying him enough time to make financial transactions that required his personal authorization. Chen, Did you record the phone call? Valdez asked. Standard procedure for all calls from suspected drug traffickers, Chen said. I'm sending you the audio file now. When Valdez played the recording for Agent Contreras, the federal agent's expression became grim. He's not speaking in code, Agent Contreras said. He's speaking in Spanish with financial terminology. And unless I'm mistaken, he just authorized the transfer of several $100 million from accounts in the Cayman Islands to banks in Switzerland. Valdez felt overwhelmed by the implications. If Santos had used his arrest as an opportunity to move hundreds of millions of dollars in cartel assets to secure offshore accounts, the entire day's events had been orchestrated to facilitate one of the largest money laundering operations in history. Agent Contreras, how is that possible? Valdez asked. Don't international money transfers require extensive documentation and verification? Not if you have the right connections, Agent Contreras said. The Gulf Cartel has been building relationships with corrupt banking officials for decades. With the right authorization codes and account numbers, hundreds of millions of dollars can be moved electronically in a matter of minutes. Agent Contreras' computer chimed with another urgent message. This time, when she read it, she immediately began making calls to Washington. What is it? Valdez asked. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas just reported unusual electronic activity, Agent Contreras said. Large international transfers totaling more than $800 million, all initiated within the past 3 hours. Valdez realized they were witnessing something far more significant than a drug trafficking operation. The Gulf Cartel had used Santos's arrest as cover for moving nearly $1 billion in criminal proceeds through the American financial system. Agent Contreras, can those transfers be stopped? Valdez asked. Not once they're completed, Agent Contreras said. International banking regulations make it almost impossible to reverse legitimate transfers, even if the source of the funds is criminal. Valdez's radio erupted with reports from units across Dallas that the coordinated attacks were ending as suddenly as they had begun. Unit 4-3. Suspects at the Home Depot have fled the scene. No shots fired, no injuries reported. Unit 7-1. Explosion at the truck stop appears to have been a controlled detonation. No casualties, minimal property damage. Unit 2-6. Bank robbery suspects have released hostages and disappeared. No weapons fired, all civilians safe. The pattern was clear. Every incident had been designed to create maximum law enforcement response with minimum actual violence. The goal hadn't been to cause casualties or property damage, but to occupy police resources while financial transactions were completed. They played us, Valdez said. The whole thing was a diversion to buy Santos time to move cartel money. And it worked, Agent Contreras said. By the time we realized what was happening, the transfers were already complete. Valdez felt anger building alongside her frustration. She had been a narcotics officer for 6 years, working to disrupt drug trafficking operations and protect her community from the violence associated with cartel activities. But instead of striking a blow against organized crime, she had inadvertently facilitated one of the largest money laundering operations in American history. Agent Contreras, what happens now? Valdez asked. Now, we try to trace where that money went and who helped them move it, Agent Contreras said. But Officer Valdez, I need you to understand something. The people who orchestrated this operation have demonstrated a level of sophistication and resources that goes far beyond typical cartel activities. What are you saying? Valdez asked. I'm saying that you and Officer Chen may have stumbled into something that threatens national security, Agent Contreras said. And that means you're both going to need federal protection until we can assess the full scope of this operation. Valdez looked out the window of the DEA field office at the Dallas skyline. where normal afternoon traffic was resuming as the coordinated attacks ended. Somewhere in those office buildings and financial institutions, nearly $1 billion in criminal proceeds had just been electronically transferred to accounts around the world. And Miguel Santos, sitting in a county jail cell with a confident smile on his face, had orchestrated the entire operation from the back seat of a police car. Valdez realized that her routine traffic stop had exposed a criminal enterprise so sophisticated and well-connected that it could manipulate the entire Dallas law enforcement apparatus to achieve its goals. The question was whether federal agents would be able to unravel the conspiracy before the people responsible used their nearly billion-dollar war chest to corrupt even more officials and expand their operations across the United States. The FBI's Dallas field office had been converted into a financial crimes task force headquarters, with agents from multiple agencies working around the clock to trace the electronic transfers that Miguel Santos had authorized from his jail cell. Valdez had never seen so many federal agents in one place, all focused on following money trails that led through dozens of countries and hundreds of financial institutions. Special Agent David Park from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had been tracking international money laundering operations for 12 years, but he told Valdez that the Santos case represented the most sophisticated scheme he had ever encountered. The transfers went through 17 different banks in 11 countries, Agent Park explained as he showed Valdez a complex diagram on his computer screen. Cayman Islands to Switzerland, Switzerland to Luxembourg, Luxembourg to Singapore, Singapore to Dubai. Each transfer was structured to stay just below the reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic government oversight. "How much money are we talking about total?" Valdez asked. "Current estimate is $1.2 billion, Agent Park said. "But that's just what we've been able to trace so far. There could be additional transfers that we haven't identified yet." Valdez felt overwhelmed by the scale of the operation. $1.2 billion was more money than she could comprehend, representing years of drug trafficking, human smuggling, kidnapping, and other criminal activities across Mexico and Central America. "Agent Park, where did all this money originally come from?" Valdez asked. "That's the disturbing part," Agent Park said. "Intelligence analysis suggests that a significant portion of these funds didn't come from traditional cartel activities like drug trafficking. A lot of this money appears to have been generated through corruption of government officials." "Corruption how?" Valdez asked. "Bribes to politicians, judges, police commanders, military officers," Agent Park said. "The Gulf Cartel has been systematically buying protection from Mexican government officials for decades, but our analysis suggests they've expanded that strategy to include American officials as well." Valdez felt a chill as the implications became clear. If the Gulf Cartel had been corrupting American government officials, the money laundering operation represented more than just financial crime. It represented a threat to the integrity of American institutions. "Any evidence of which American officials might be involved?" Valdez asked. Agent Park's expression became grim. "That's classified at levels above my clearance," he said. "But I can tell you that this investigation has attracted attention from the highest levels of the Justice Department." Valdez's cell phone rang. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez from Dallas PD Narcotics Division. "Valdez, I need you back at headquarters immediately," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "We've got a situation developing that's connected to your Santos arrest." "What kind of situation?" Valdez asked. "The kind that involves internal affairs and federal prosecutors," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "How quickly can you get here?" 20 minutes later, Valdez was sitting in Lieutenant Rodriguez's office alongside Agent Contreras from the DEA, and a woman she didn't recognize wearing a dark suit and federal identification badge. "Officer Valdez, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "She's been assigned to prosecute the Santos case, but some new information has come to light that complicates the situation." "What kind of new information?" Valdez asked. "Information suggesting that Miguel Santos's arrest wasn't as random as it appeared," AUSA Williams said. "We have evidence that someone within Dallas PD may have provided Santos with advance warning about increased drug interdiction efforts on I-35. Valdez felt her stomach drop. If someone within the police department had been feeding information to the Gulf Cartel, it would explain how Santos had been able to orchestrate such a sophisticated operation. "What evidence?" Valdez asked. AUSA Williams opened a folder and removed several printed emails. "These communications were recovered from Santos's cell phone," she said. "They showed detailed discussions about police patrol schedules, drug interdiction protocols, and specific officers assigned to highway enforcement." Valdez examined the emails and realized they contained information that would only be available to someone with access to internal police communications and scheduling systems. "Any idea who sent these emails?" Valdez asked. "The emails were sent from an encrypted account that we haven't been able to trace," AUSA Williams said. "But the level of detail suggests someone with significant access to police operations." Agent Contreras leaned forward in her chair. "Officer Valdez, I need to ask you some questions about your assignment to the Santos traffic stop. How did you end up responding to Officer Chen's call for assistance?" "Standard protocol," Valdez said. "Chen called for narcotics division support when his drug dog alerted on the vehicle. I was the closest available narcotics officer." "But how did Chen know to call specifically for narcotics division support?" Agent Contreras asked. "Traffic stops don't usually involve specialized units unless there's a specific reason." Valdez thought back to the traffic stop and realized Agent Contreras was right. Chen had called for narcotics division assistance before he had even searched the vehicle, almost as if he had been expecting to find drugs. "You think Chen was involved?" Valdez asked. "We're investigating all possibilities," AUSA Williams said. "But Officer Valdez, I need you to understand that your own actions are also under scrutiny. A routine traffic stop that results in a billion-dollar money laundering operation raises questions about whether law enforcement was manipulated or whether someone was actively facilitating criminal activity." Valdez felt anger building alongside her fear. She had been doing her job professionally and by the book, but now she was being treated as a suspect in a conspiracy she didn't understand. "AUSA Williams, are you suggesting I was involved in facilitating this operation?" Valdez asked. "I'm not suggesting anything," AUSA Williams said, "but I am telling you that this investigation will examine every aspect of how the Santos arrest was handled, including your actions and decisions." Lieutenant Rodriguez stood up from behind his desk. "Officer Valdez, pending the outcome of this investigation, you're being placed on administrative leave with pay. Your weapon and badge will be secured, and you're not to discuss this case with anyone outside of official channels." Valdez felt her world collapsing. Administrative leave was often the first step toward criminal charges or termination. 6 years of dedicated police work was being called into question because she had responded professionally to what appeared to be a routine drug interdiction call. "Lieutenant, I followed protocol exactly," Valdez said. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I believe you," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "But Officer Valdez, this case has implications that go far beyond Dallas PD. Federal investigators need to be absolutely certain that no law enforcement personnel were compromised by cartel influence." As Valdez left police headquarters without her badge and weapon for the first time in 6 years, she realized that Miguel Santos had achieved something even more destructive than moving $1.2 billion in criminal proceeds. He had created suspicion and distrust within the law enforcement agencies that were supposed to protect the community from people like him. But Valdez also realized that if federal investigators were looking for evidence of corruption within Dallas PD, they might be overlooking other possibilities. What if Santos hadn't needed inside information from police sources? What if the Gulf Cartel had other ways of monitoring law enforcement activities? As she drove home to an uncertain future, Valdez began thinking about the sophisticated communication equipment that Agent Contreras had described in other cartel operations. If the Gulf Cartel had been intercepting police radio communications or hacking into department computer systems, they could have obtained the information found in Santos's emails without any help from corrupt officers. But proving that theory would require investigating skills and resources that Valdez no longer had access to as a suspended police officer. Unless she was willing to conduct her own unofficial investigation into the people who had destroyed her career and threatened her community. Looking in her rearview mirror to make sure she wasn't being followed, Valdez realized that she might not have a choice. Valdez had been off the force for 2 weeks when she got the call that changed everything. She was sitting in her apartment, scrolling through job postings for private security companies, and wondering if her law enforcement career was over, when her cell phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Officer Valdez?" The voice was male, middle-aged, with a slight Hispanic accent. "My name is Carlos Mendoza. I think we need to talk." "I'm not an officer anymore," Valdez said, "and I don't talk to people I don't know." "I know who you are," Mendoza said, "and I know what really happened with Miguel Santos. If you want to clear your name and stop the people who set you up, meet me at the Starbucks on McKinney Avenue in 1 hour." The line went dead before Valdez could respond. She sat staring at her phone, trying to decide whether this was an opportunity to learn the truth or a trap designed to get her into even more trouble. Against her better judgment, she decided to take the risk. The Starbucks on McKinney Avenue was in the heart of Dallas's trendy uptown district, surrounded by high-rise condominiums and expensive restaurants. Valdez arrived early and positioned herself where she could observe everyone entering the coffee shop while maintaining a clear exit route if the meeting turned dangerous. Carlos Mendoza was exactly what she had expected. A man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he had seen too much violence for someone in legitimate business. "Officer Valdez," Mendoza said as he sat down across from her, "thank you for coming." "It's just Valdez now," she said, "and I haven't decided whether I'm staying, so talk fast." "I used to work for the Gulf Cartel," Mendoza said. "Financial operations, money laundering, corruption of government officials. I did it for 15 years before I realized that the organization I was serving was destroying everything I cared about." Valdez studied Mendoza's face, looking for signs of deception. "If you're telling the truth, why are you still alive?" "Cartels don't usually let people retire with their knowledge intact." "Because I have insurance," Mendoza said. "Documentation of every financial transaction, every corrupt official, every criminal operation I was involved in. If something happens to me, that information gets released to law enforcement agencies in both Mexico and the United States." "What does this have to do with Miguel Santos?" Valdez asked. "Miguel Santos isn't just a financial officer for the Gulf Cartel," Mendoza said. "He's the point man for a new strategy designed to corrupt American law enforcement agencies from the inside." Valdez felt her pulse quicken. What kind of strategy? Instead of bribing individual officers or officials, The cartel has been systematically infiltrating law enforcement databases and communication systems, Mendoza said. They can monitor police radio traffic, access criminal intelligence files, and even manipulate dispatch systems to influence how officers respond to incidents. The implications were staggering. If the Gulf Cartel had been hacking into police computer systems, they could have orchestrated Santos's arrest without any help from corrupt officers. How is that possible? Valdez asked. The same way any sophisticated cyber-criminal organization operates, Mendoza said. They recruit computer experts, purchase advanced hacking software, and target vulnerable systems that haven't been properly secured. Mendoza pulled out a laptop computer and showed Valdez a series of technical documents that she didn't fully understand. But the basic concept was clear. The Gulf Cartel had been using cyber warfare techniques to gather intelligence on law enforcement activities. This shows that the cartel has been monitoring Dallas PD communications for at least 6 months, Mendoza said. They knew about increased drug interdiction efforts on I-35 because they were intercepting internal police communications. Why are you telling me this? Valdez asked. Because Miguel Santos's operation was just a test run, Mendoza said. The cartel is planning something much bigger, and they need law enforcement agencies to be distracted by internal investigations and corruption allegations. Valdez realized that the federal investigation into possible police corruption was playing right into the cartel's hands. While FBI agents and internal affairs investigators were focused on finding corrupt officers who didn't exist, the real criminal organization was preparing for their next operation. What kind of operation? Valdez asked. A coordinated attack on American financial institutions designed to destabilize the entire banking system, Mendoza said. They've been using the $1.2 billion they laundered through Santos to purchase cyber warfare capabilities that could shut down electronic banking networks across the Southwest. Valdez felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Mendoza was describing. An attack on banking systems could affect millions of people and cause economic damage that would dwarf the losses from any previous terrorist attack. When is this supposed to happen? Valdez asked. Soon, Mendoza said. But I don't know the exact timeline. That information is restricted to the cartel's senior leadership. Valdez was processing this information when her cell phone rang. It was Agent Contreras from the DEA. Valdez, where are you? Agent Contreras asked. We need to talk immediately. I'm not available for questions, Valdez said. Remember, I'm suspended from the force and under investigation. This isn't about the investigation, Agent Contreras said. This is about a credible threat against your life. Intelligence indicates that Gulf Cartel operatives are planning to eliminate anyone who can connect them to the Santos operation. Valdez looked at Mendoza, who was listening to her phone conversation with obvious concern. Agent Contreras, how credible is this threat? Valdez asked. Credible enough that we're implementing protective custody protocols immediately, Agent Contreras said. Where are you right now? Valdez realized she was facing a critical decision. She could trust federal agents who had been investigating her for corruption, or she could trust a former cartel operative who claimed to have information that could clear her name and prevent a major attack on American financial institutions. Agent Contreras, I need some time to think about this, Valdez said. Valdez, you don't have time, Agent Contreras said. These people have unlimited resources and no regard for innocent life. If they've decided you're a threat, they won't hesitate to kill you. After ending the call, Valdez looked at Mendoza with new understanding. You knew about the threat against my life, didn't you? I knew it was a possibility, Mendoza said. The cartel eliminates anyone who can expose their operations. But Officer Valdez, I also know how to help you stay alive long enough to stop what they're planning." "How?" Valdez asked. "By helping you gather evidence that proves your innocence while also documenting the cartel's cyber warfare capabilities," Mendoza said. "But it will require you to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly." Valdez studied Mendoza's face, trying to decide whether he was offering salvation or leading her into a trap. Either way, staying alive long enough to clear her name and protect her community seemed more important than playing it safe. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The abandoned warehouse in South Dallas looked like dozens of others that dotted the industrial landscape along the Trinity River. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. But Mendoza explained that this particular building had been converted into a sophisticated cyber warfare operations center that the Gulf Cartel used to monitor and manipulate American law enforcement agencies. "They call it the Digital War Room," Mendoza said as he and Valdez approached the building under cover of darkness. 24 hours a day, computer specialists monitor police communications across Texas, looking for opportunities to exploit law enforcement activities for criminal purposes. Valdez was wearing body armor and carrying the off-duty pistol she was still authorized to possess, but she felt inadequately prepared for what amounted to a military operation against a heavily defended position. "How many people are inside?" Valdez asked. "Usually 8 to 10 operatives," Mendoza said. "Computer specialists, communications interceptors, and security personnel. But tonight should be different because most of the staff has been reassigned to prepare for the banking system attack." They approached the warehouse through an area of vacant lots and abandoned buildings that provided cover from observation. Mendoza had been monitoring cartel communications for weeks, waiting for an opportunity when the digital war room would be lightly defended. "Mendoza, if we get caught doing this, both of us are going to end up dead," Valdez said. "If we don't do this, thousands of innocent people are going to lose their life savings when the cartel crashes the banking system," Mendoza replied. "Sometimes you have to choose between personal safety and protecting the community." As they reached the warehouse, Valdez could see light coming from windows on the second floor, along with the faint hum of electronic equipment. The building was definitely occupied, but the parking lot contained only 2 vehicles instead of the usual 5 or 6 that Mendoza had observed during previous surveillance. "2 guards, maximum," Mendoza whispered. "The rest of the staff is probably at the primary operations center preparing for the banking attack." They entered the warehouse through a service door that Mendoza had disabled earlier in the week. The first floor was empty except for old machinery and industrial debris, but they could hear voices and electronic sounds from the floor above. As they climbed a metal staircase to the second floor, Valdez realized she was about to see evidence of criminal activities that most law enforcement officers never encountered. The Gulf Cartel's cyber warfare capabilities represented a new form of organized crime that combined traditional criminal violence with sophisticated technology. The second floor had been completely renovated into a modern operations center, with banks of computer monitors displaying real-time feeds from police radio communications across Texas. Valdez could see screens showing Dallas PD dispatch calls, Harris County Sheriff communications, and even federal agency radio traffic. "Jesus Christ," Valdez whispered. "They're monitoring everything." "Not just monitoring," Mendoza said. "Look at this." He showed Valdez a computer terminal that was displaying what appeared to be the Dallas PD internal database, complete with officer assignment schedules, criminal intelligence files, and ongoing investigation reports. "They've got complete access to our computer systems," Valdez said. "Not just Dallas," Mendoza said. "Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Fort Worth. They've been systematically hacking into law enforcement databases across Texas for months. 2 cartel operatives were working at computer terminals, so focused on their screens that they didn't notice Valdez and Mendoza entering the operations center. Both men appeared to be in their 20s, wearing expensive clothes and headphones that isolated them from their surroundings. Valdez drew her pistol and approached the nearest operative while Mendoza covered the other one. "Federal agents," Valdez said loudly. "Put your hands where I can see them." The 2 operatives looked up in surprise, but neither made any aggressive moves. They appeared to be computer specialists rather than armed security personnel. "We're not federal agents," the first operative said in accented English. "We're just technicians. Technicians who are helping criminals attack American financial institutions," Valdez said. "Turn around and put your hands on the desk." While Valdez secured the 2 operatives, Mendoza began examining the computer systems and downloading files that contained evidence of the cartel's cyber warfare activities. "Valdez, you need to see this," Mendoza said. "They've got detailed plans for attacking banking networks across the Southwest. ATM systems, credit card processing, electronic fund transfers. They're planning to shut down everything simultaneously." Valdez examined the computer screens and realized the scope of the planned attack was even larger than Mendoza had initially described. The cartel wasn't just planning to disrupt banking systems. They were planning to steal billions of dollars during the chaos that would follow the system shutdowns. "When is this supposed to happen?" Valdez asked. "According to these files, tomorrow morning during peak banking hours," Mendoza said. "They want to maximize the number of people affected and the amount of money they can steal." Valdez's radio crackled with a call that made her blood run cold. All units. We have reports of explosions at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. This appears to be a coordinated terrorist attack. All available personnel respond immediately." The Federal Reserve Bank was the nerve center of the regional banking system, responsible for processing electronic transactions worth billions of dollars every day. An attack on that facility could cripple financial networks across the entire Southwest. "They started early," Mendoza said. "The explosions are probably just diversions to draw law enforcement away from their real target." "Which is what?" Valdez asked. "The electronic banking networks themselves," Mendoza said. "While police and federal agents are responding to explosions at the Federal Reserve Building, cartel computer specialists are using malware to crash banking systems across the region." Valdez realized they were witnessing the beginning of the largest cyber attack on American financial institutions in history. But instead of being able to help coordinate a law enforcement response, she was stuck in an abandoned warehouse with evidence that might not be believed by federal agents who already suspected her of corruption. "Mendoza, we need to get this information to law enforcement immediately," Valdez said. "Not yet," Mendoza said. "If we turn this over to federal agents now, they'll focus on questioning us instead of stopping the attack. We need to gather enough evidence to prove your innocence and document the cartel's cyber warfare capabilities." As Mendoza continued downloading files from the cartel's computer systems, Valdez monitored police radio communications and realized the attack was expanding beyond Dallas. Reports were coming in of similar incidents in Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm law enforcement while the cartel executed their cyber warfare operation. "Mendoza, how long do we have before they realize this facility has been compromised?" Valdez asked. "Maybe an hour," Mendoza said. "But that should be enough time to download everything we need." Valdez was watching the computer screens when she noticed something that made her stomach clench. One of the displays was showing real-time feeds from security cameras inside Dallas PD headquarters, including views of the Narcotics Division offices and the Communications Center. "They've got cameras inside police headquarters," Valdez said. "That's how they knew exactly when to arrest Miguel Santos," Mendoza said. "They were monitoring police activities in real time and could adjust their operations based on law enforcement response. The implications were staggering. If the Gulf Cartel had been able to place surveillance equipment inside police facilities, they could monitor any law enforcement operation and take countermeasures to protect their criminal activities." Valdez's cell phone rang. It was Agent Contreras from the DEA. "Valdez, we know where you are," Agent Contreras said. "You're in extreme danger, and you need federal protection immediately." "Agent Contreras, I'm gathering evidence that will prove the cartel has been conducting cyber warfare against law enforcement agencies," Valdez said. "Valdez, get out of there now," Agent Contreras said. "Intelligence indicates that cartel security forces are en route to your location." Valdez looked at Mendoza, who was still downloading files from the computer systems. "How much more time do you need?" 5 more minutes, Mendoza said. "But Officer Valdez, if we don't finish this download, we'll never be able to prove how the cartel has been manipulating law enforcement agencies." Through the warehouse windows, Valdez could see vehicle headlights approaching the building. The cartel security forces that Agent Contreras had warned about were arriving faster than expected. "Mendoza, we're out of time," Valdez said. "Then we finish this the hard way," Mendoza replied, drawing a pistol from inside his jacket. Valdez realized she was about to be caught in a gunfight between federal agents trying to rescue her and cartel operatives trying to eliminate her. Either way, her chances of survival were rapidly diminishing. But if the evidence they had gathered could prevent the cartel from crashing American banking systems and stealing billions of dollars, the risk might be worth taking. The firefight lasted exactly 7 minutes, but it felt like hours to Valdez as she crouched behind an overturned desk while bullets shattered computer monitors and punched holes in the warehouse walls around her. The cartel security team had arrived with military-grade weapons and the tactical training to use them effectively, but they hadn't expected to encounter federal agents who were equally well-armed and prepared. Agent Contreras had brought a full FBI tactical team to extract Valdez from the warehouse, and their superior coordination gradually overwhelmed the cartel operatives who were more accustomed to intimidating civilians than fighting trained law enforcement officers. When the shooting finally stopped, 3 cartel operatives were dead, and 2 others were wounded and in custody. Mendoza had been shot in the shoulder, but was conscious and talking, while Valdez had somehow escaped injury despite being in the middle of the firefight. "Valdez, are you hurt?" Agent Contreras asked as FBI medics checked her for injuries. "I'm fine," Valdez said. "But Agent Contreras, we downloaded evidence that proves the cartel has been conducting cyber warfare against law enforcement agencies. They've been hacking into police databases and monitoring radio communications across Texas." "We know," Agent Contreras said. "Carlos Mendoza contacted us 3 days ago and agreed to cooperate with a federal investigation in exchange for protection from cartel retaliation." Valdez felt confusion mixed with relief. Mendoza was working with federal agents? He's been providing intelligence about cartel cyber warfare operations for weeks, Agent Contreras said. But we needed someone with law enforcement credentials to help him access the cartel's computer systems without arousing suspicion. Valdez realized she had been used as an unwitting participant in a federal undercover operation. "Agent Contreras, was I ever really under investigation for corruption?" "The investigation was real," Agent Contreras said. "But we were investigating the possibility that cartel operatives had infiltrated Dallas PD, not that individual officers were corrupt." Your actions during the Santos arrest helped us realize that the cartel was using cyber warfare. That's the interesting part, Agent Contreras said. The $1.2 billion they transferred through international banks was actually monitored by federal agents the entire time. We've been tracking every transaction, and most of that money is going to be recovered through international cooperation agreements. Valdez felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the operation she had unknowingly been part of. Agent Contreras, how long have federal agencies been investigating this cartel network? 2 years, Agent Contreras said. Ever since we realized that traditional law enforcement methods weren't effective against criminal organizations that use cyber warfare tactics. As FBI agents escorted Valdez and Mendoza out of the warehouse, Valdez could see the Dallas skyline glowing in the distance. Somewhere in those office buildings and financial institutions, computer networks were processing billions of dollars in electronic transactions that the Gulf Cartel had tried to steal or destroy. Agent Contreras, Valdez said, "What happens to my career with Dallas PD? You'll be reinstated immediately with full back pay and a commendation for your role in disrupting a major terrorist threat," Agent Contreras said. "But Officer Valdez, I hope you'll consider joining the FBI's Cybercrime Task Force. We need officers with your experience and instincts to help fight the next generation of criminal organizations." Valdez thought about the sophisticated computer systems she had seen in the cartel's operations center, and about the dedicated criminals who had been using technology to stay ahead of traditional law enforcement methods. "Agent Contreras, is this kind of cyber warfare going to become more common?" Valdez asked. "Unfortunately, yes," Agent Contreras said. "Criminal organizations are increasingly using technology to monitor law enforcement activities and manipulate government systems. The Santos case was just the beginning." As they drove back toward Dallas, Valdez realized that her routine traffic stop on Interstate 35 had exposed a new form of organized crime that combined traditional criminal violence with sophisticated cyber warfare capabilities. The Gulf Cartel's attempt to crash American banking systems represented a threat to national security that required a coordinated response from multiple federal agencies. But she also realized that local law enforcement officers like herself still played a crucial role in identifying and disrupting these threats. It had been her attention to detail during the Santos arrest that had provided federal agents with the evidence they needed to unravel the cartel's cyber warfare network. Looking at the city lights of Dallas spread out below them, Valdez understood that the next generation of police work would require officers who could navigate both the streets and the digital networks that increasingly connected all aspects of modern life. The question was whether law enforcement agencies would be able to adapt quickly enough to stay ahead of criminal organizations that had unlimited money and no regard for the innocent people who would be hurt by their actions. But for now, at least one major threat had been neutralized, and the American financial system was secure from the Gulf Cartel's cyber warfare capabilities. And Officer Sarah Valdez had her badge back, along with a new understanding of the evolving challenges that would define law enforcement in the 21st century. 3 months later, Valdez was working with the FBI's Dallas Cybercrime Task Force, using her street-level experience to help federal agents understand how traditional criminal organizations were adapting to use digital technology. Miguel Santos had been convicted on federal terrorism charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole, while his uncle, Joaquin Santos, had been captured in Mexico and extradited to face charges in American courts. The $1.2 billion in laundered money had been recovered and returned to the victims of cartel violence across Mexico and Central America, providing resources for community development and law enforcement training in areas that had been devastated by criminal organizations. But Valdez knew that other cartels were watching and learning from the Gulf Cartel's mistakes. The next cyber warfare attack would be more sophisticated, better coordinated, and potentially more successful than the operation she had helped to stop. The war between law enforcement and organized crime was evolving into a digital battlefield, where victory would depend on which side could more effectively combine traditional investigative skills with cutting-edge technology. And somewhere in the maze of computer networks that connected financial institutions across the world, the next generation of criminals was already planning their attack on the systems that kept American society functioning safely and securely. Officer Sarah Valdez was ready for them,